Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. There is also a link in the description to my Patreon. It has Naruto fanfiction that cannot be posted on YouTube. There is some free content on there. So, you don't have to be a paying member to enjoy listening to excellent fanfiction. Chapter 19 Sparring. Sakura's manic invasion of Sasuke's bedroom was the last they saw of each other for the next 3 days, aside from their brief interactions during the missions and training sessions with the rest of Team 7. Sakura had an inkling that he was hoping to corner her and demand an explanation for that strange encounter, but it wasn't like he was going to bring it up with Naruto anywhere in the vicinity. That was just a recipe for disaster. And aside from their usual routines, Sasuke and Sakura were both extremely busy. By some miracle, the good news didn't stop with the letter she'd read in Sasuke's flat. Sakura discovered that very day that Kakashi was, in fact, taking Sasuke under his wing for extra training. Although the Chunin selection exams were probably considerably safer now that the Sound Village wasn't participating, Sakura figured it would be best to err on the side of caution. The more Sasuke was able to defend himself, the better. Kakashi chose to train alone with Sasuke in the evenings, meaning that Sakura's late-night training sessions with her teammate were temporarily discontinued. And Kakashi ended up keeping Sasuke out so late that Sakura was usually passed out on his couch long before he returned to the flat. In all honesty, Sakura wasn't sure if there was any benefit to hanging around in Sasuke's flat anymore. Given his absence, there wasn't much difference between her staying there, unattended, and staying at her parents' house, where she could keep a closer eye on the time travel scroll. Although Sakura didn't mind the arrangement. His house was much cleaner and quieter than hers, making it an optimal environment to study from medical textbooks and practice ninjutsu without disturbances. She also had a feeling that Sasuke still expected her stay in his flat, considering how her alleged stalker, who likely didn't even exist, hadn't been caught. And, okay. Now that Sakura was hyperventilating less often, she could acknowledge that there was something pleasant and, dare she say, thrilling about spending so much time in Sasuke's presence. Despite their limited physical contact as of late, Sakura found other means of reaching out to him. On the second night of his private training with Kakashi, just before going to bed, Sakura put together a simple dish for her teammate and left it in his fridge. She wasn't sure how he felt about her meddling with his grocery items, but when she opened his fridge the following evening, the food she'd prepared was gone. So she made Sasuke another meal the next day. As for Sakura's own training, after one night of practicing by herself, she quickly realized that she needed a new training partner. There was only so much she could do herself. At first, she considered asking Naruto if he'd meet her in the evenings, but after some careful thought, she decided to explore her other options first. She already spent a considerable amount of time testing her patience working with him on missions and they had drastically different styles baseline abilities. But who were her other options? She began ticking off the names of her other old friends. She definitely wanted to work with someone talented who would have an interest in teaching her new skills. But if this person's abilities solely revolved around a special bloodline trait, the training session would be of little use to her. Sakura nodded to herself. I know just who I'm going to ask. As anticipated, Rock Lee was ecstatic when Sakura showed up at his front door with her training gear. The over-energetic, green jumpsuit-wearing boy looked just as Sakura remembered him, which perhaps spoke to how little his future self had changed. His shiny, black bob cut, beady eyes, and busy eyebrows were unmistakable. The same could be said for his massive crush on Sakura. He had always been forthright about his feelings for her, especially in the case of this younger, less mature Lee, who hadn't quite grasped the difference between wanting to date someone and actually dating them. Thus, as anticipated, Sakura spent the coming days dodging romantic declarations and politely declining dates. This is worth it, though, Sakura reminded herself for the umpteenth time a few days later, because Rock Lee had unmatched skills in taijutsu. As a product of having virtually no abilities in ninjutsu, through sheer determination, this boy had honed skills in gritty, raw martial arts so advanced that they rivaled and often surpassed the talents of any ninja their age. This had a certain appeal to Sakura, who didn't have any special bloodline traits herself. Simply being in Lee's presence for extended periods of time was quite exhausting, however. Sakura worked as hard as she could during their training sessions, pushing herself past the point where she and Sasuke would normally call it a night, but Lee's stamina never seemed to waver. "Are you even human?" Sakura found herself gasping on numerous occasions. Lee seemed to take this remark as a huge compliment for some reason. There was only so much one's stamina and strength would increase after just 3 days of intensive training, but Sakura managed to retain a range of new physical techniques, ways of approaching opponents, and rather unusual, but potentially useful, acrobatic maneuvers to strike and pin enemies down within battle. She was curious just how many of these new skills would prove useful in real combat. As it turned out, Sakura would have an opportunity to test that much sooner than anticipated. On Friday morning, when Kakashi finally showed up at the training grounds to meet his students, he made a brief announcement. "Our mission got cancelled," he said. Naruto whooped loudly, followed immediately by a sheepish, fake attempt to look disappointed. "And I have some things to do today, so I'm going to leave you all to spar for the morning. Don't kill each other because we do have a mission tomorrow. See ya." And then, as quickly as he appeared, their sensei vanished in a cloud of smoke. Spar? Sakura thought, excitement bubbling beneath her skin. It had been far too long since she'd last sparred with the boys. "All right," Naruto exclaimed while raising a fist into the air. "It's every man for himself. Ready, set, go." And with that, he created 5 shadow clones and crouched into a fighting stance. Wait, Sakura sighed while rubbing her temples. "We need to lay down some rules. Every man for himself would probably be a horrible mess." From there, Sakura organized a new setup for their sparring matches. They would participate in one-on-one fights while the third member acted as a referee with the authority to stop any match that was getting out of hand. And Sakura had a funny feeling that her role as a referee would be a very active one. "Okay," Sasuke agreed. "Who goes first?" "We're going first," Naruto bellowed and waving a threatening finger in the Uchiha's face. Sasuke raised his eyebrows. "All right," he said. "But I don't see why you're so eager to lose." "Why you?" Naruto snarled through gritted teeth before advancing with rage in his eyes. From there, not only fists but also ruthless insults were tossed. Sakura perched herself beneath the shade of a nearby tree and used the opportunity to observe her teammates' fighting styles. Naruto was, without question, an extremely offensive fighter. He was reckless and made his motives rather obvious, but he had more brute strength than his sparring partner and he managed to throw more hits, although not all of them made it to their target. Sasuke, in contrast, was far more defensive, so he spent most of his time dodging the army of Naruto's clones. He was faster and lighter on his feet than Naruto, and although he aimed fewer strikes, each one was deliberate and calculated. After about half an hour of punching, kicking, and cursing, the hem of Naruto's left pant leg caught fire. "You bastard!" he yelled as he tried stamping out the flames with his other foot. Sakura raced over to Naruto, who was now rolling around on the ground, and promptly poured a water bottle onto his pants. "I'm calling the match," she said while crouching over Naruto's leg to heal it. She tore away the singed fabric to reveal a nasty second-degree burn. "You okay?" Sasuke asked while crouching over the two of them with a mocking smirk. "Knock it off," Naruto growled back. The arguing ensued until Sakura was finished with Naruto's leg. "You should rest for this round, Naruto," Sakura ordered before he had a chance to protest. "Let's go next, Sasuke." "Sure," he answered with a shrug. They made their way to the middle of the grounds, ignoring Naruto's whining behind them. As they squared each other up and assumed battle stances, Sakura borrowing one of Lee's, she stood straight and held one arm out in front of her, palm up. Sakura considered what the best approach to fighting the Uchiha prodigy might be. By a long shot, he was stronger and faster than her, had no obvious weaknesses, and had a special bloodline trait that allowed him to predict her movements. Despite her rigorous training for the past several months, Sakura's movements were nowhere near as sharp, powerful, or coordinated as they were in her previous life. So, to put it bluntly, Sakura was at a huge disadvantage even at full strength. But I'm cleverer than him. If Sakura had any chance at winning, she would need to outsmart her opponent. The trouble was, she didn't know how yet. They caught eyes and exchanged a nod, and then the fight began. Sakura launched her attack first by running at Sasuke head-on, but flash-stepping behind him at the last second. By the time he turned around, she had already crouched down to aim a sweeping kick at his legs, which he managed to block just in time. Sakura had learned in her training with Lee that frequently changing your position, through flash-stepping or simply faking out your opponent, was a very useful strategy in man-to-man combat. So that's exactly what she did. And Sakura found, to her great pleasure, that her method of constantly moving and changing directions allowed her to stay in stride with Sasuke, for the most part. In fact, he only managed to land one good hit so far, but she'd seen it coming and managed to block it and minimize the damage. Sakura also took advantage of her superb abilities in chakra control by concentrating chakra to her limbs to enhance each of her own strikes. But something was starting to get on her nerves. "You aren't using your Sharingan," Sakura remarked through heavy breaths after about 10 minutes of close combat. She blew a stray strand of hair out of her face and closed in again. "I don't need them," he replied with an amused glint in his dark eyes as he delivered a blow that just grazed Sakura's already aching arm. Sakura gritted her teeth. "Is that so?" she thought with a new rush of determination. She would get Sasuke to activate his Sharingan if it was the last thing she did. It was time to speed things up. Without wasting a second, Sakura aimed a sharp punch at Sasuke's throat, but as soon as he raised his arm to counter it, she changed gears and cast a substitution jutsu. A log appeared in place of Sakura, whose real body was winding up to strike a pressure point in his back from behind. By the time he discovered her intentions and whirled around to block her attack, Sakura was making the hand seals for the exact same jutsu, and disappeared again. Sakura kept her charade up for a while longer, and each time, she appeared in an entirely new position. Above him with shuriken in hand, behind him with a kunai to his throat, below him, poised to take out his ankles, up the tree with her fists blazing with chakra. Round and round they went. Sakura managed to successfully trick him with 11 substitutions, in fact, at which point she began to feel the effects of chakra depletion, when Sasuke grew frustrated. Actually, it was more like he completely snapped. After luring Sasuke around the base of the tree, right as she was winding up to throw a punch at his jaw, with lightning-fast speed, Sasuke snatched at the front of her dress and slammed her against the tree. The impact nearly knocked the breath out of her as the trunk crumbled against Sakura's back. "That'll leave a mark." She wheezed against the collar of her dress, which was pulling tightly against her throat. Sasuke, who was breathing heavily with his eyes closed, finally came to his senses and loosened his grip. "That's frustrating," he growled while opening his eyes to reveal a pair of crimson-red irises. "I did it," she thought with a surge of emotion. Sakura hadn't expected to beat Sasuke in hand-to-hand combat, not without her older, stronger body or the strength of 100 seal. But she was still rather pleased with this small victory. Now if she wasn't in so much damn excruciating pain, she just might have celebrated. "Oi, Sasuke! Don't manhandle Sakura-chan like that," called Naruto, who was scrambling to his feet. "What kind of technique is that, anyways? I'm disqualifying you." "No, Naruto," Sakura groaned and attempting to smile. "This is fair game." Though, she had to admit, Sasuke wasn't normally the type to lose his cool. Sasuke released Sakura and took a step back while she slid back down the trunk and landed on her feet with an impact that sent a shock up her ankles. "Your fighting style has changed," he remarked to Sakura, observing her carefully as his eyes faded back to black. "Who have you been training with?" "An old friend," she answered with a shrug, silently enjoying leaving the air of mystery. One of the reasons she'd managed to hold her own against Sasuke was because he incorrectly assumed he knew everything she was capable of. She made a private note to train with Lee, and perhaps the other rookies, more often. Then she might actually stand a chance of keeping Sasuke in the village when he tried to leave it in the future. Okay, my turn. Believe it! Exclaimed Naruto while punching the air dramatically. Oh, great. Sakura winced as she straightened up. Sasuke sure managed to do some damage with that last hit, and she'd nearly forgotten that there was one more fight to go. Heal yourself first, Sasuke ordered with a frown. I injured you. It's fine, Sakura dismissed. That's a waste of chakra. Naruto, who was way too thrilled at the prospect of sparring again, didn't seem to notice her injury. Let's go, Sakura-chan. He hollered while conjuring up several clones and leading her away from the tree, under which Sasuke was now standing with his arms folded. This wasn't good. Despite the predictability of Naruto's advances, Sakura's back injury was going to slow her down considerably. And the doppelgangers were surely going to attack from multiple directions at once, which meant she couldn't afford to get caught in the middle of them. It'll have to be long range then. As Naruto's barrage of clones charged, Sakura loaded up her fist with chakra and slammed it into the ground, sending large chunks of earth, and most of Naruto's clones, flying in all directions. She used the opportunity to spring backwards and fire a fistful of shuriken at the clones, and, as a result, nearly all of them disappeared in puffs of smoke. Sakura managed to repeat this tactic a few times, using her chakra-loaded punches and weapons to keep Naruto and his clones at bay, but her chakra was depleting at a fast rate and her untreated back was getting worse the more she moved. Finally, after about 15 minutes of long-ranged combat, one of Naruto's clones made it through her weapon's fire. He flash-stepped behind her, and before Sakura could brace herself for it, he wrapped his arms tightly around her waist from behind to pin her in place. The pain in her back was debilitating now, and Sakura couldn't help the cry that escaped her lips and the tears that collected in the corners of her eyes. She managed to catch sight of the real Naruto propelling himself into the air before her, preparing to deliver a finishing blow. This is going to hurt. Pow! With a loud crack, Sasuke appeared out of nowhere and punched Naruto square in the face, sending him reeling head first into the ground. The clone behind Sakura disappeared immediately, leaving her to collapse in a heap. Sasuke was staring down at Naruto now, his expression unreadable. This match is over, he snapped before turning to Sakura. You shouldn't have done that, Sakura groaned, though she was secretly immensely relieved. Surely she would have found a way to counter Naruto's punch, but at the expense of worsening her injury. Sasuke considered her comment. I just wanted an excuse to punch him, honestly. What was that, bastard? Spluttered Naruto through a mouthful of dirt. He was on his feet in an instant. We can fight again, if you'd like. But Sakura barely heard him. Something's off. She hadn't the slightest idea why, or how it came on so suddenly, but at that very moment, a terrible, uncomfortable chill swept through her body. Her skin crawled and her heart rate quickened. What was going on? She noticed Sasuke seize up and turn away from Naruto, his gaze locking on the tree behind them, to where a silent figure was peering out from the branches. It was Gaara. This is bad. It appeared their sparring matches had attracted the curious Sand Ninja and future Kazekage. At this point in time, however, Gaara was no village protector. No, Sakura knew that Gaara as a young teenager was a psychopathic mass murderer who had, unlike Naruto, already tapped into his demon's powers and used them to kill for pleasure. What do you want, you red-haired punk? Taunted Naruto, who seemed to clue in that his teammates had redirected their attentions to the newcomer. Naruto, stop, Sakura pleaded, and taking hold of his arm. Let's go home. She knew Gaara was way out of any of their leagues. He was probably more powerful than the three of them combined, especially after they had depleted so much energy on sparring. Then two new figures appeared in swirls of leaves. Sakura recognized them immediately as Kankuro and Temari, Gaara's teammates. They were both quite tall, with broad-shouldered Kankuro supporting what Sakura knew to be a massive puppet on his back, and Temari, the striking blonde in a fitted, lavender dress, carrying her giant fan for orchestrating wind-style jutsu. What have you gotten yourself into now? Kankuro started before peering towards Team 7 from under his dark hood. Oh. Pink. You're the pink healer girl, aren't you? He exclaimed with a crooked smile. See, Gaara, it's a good thing we didn't leave you here to kill them, huh? We'd be in trouble for messing with someone like her. What's that? Naruto butt in, balling his hands into fists. What makes you think that brat could kill us? But no one seemed to hear him. Sasuke Flash stepped in front of his teammates defensively. Who are you? He demanded coldly, and Sakura watched, with a tinge of annoyance, as Temari proceeded to check him out from head to toe with a raised eyebrow and a smirk dancing on her lips. Oh, said Kankuro excitedly. You must be Sasuke Uchiha. Sasuke interrupted. Now answer my question. Sakura had to admit that Sasuke sure knew how to sound cool when he wanted to be. And me? I'm Naruto. Believe it. And Naruto had a bit more work to do on the coolness front. Gaara finally spoke, his pale, dark-rimmed eyes roaming over the trio. My name is Gaara of the Desert, he said in a soft yet icy tone. And we're Temari and Kankuro, added Temari, while running her fingers along the edge of the fan fastened to her back. We're here for the Chunin exams. We're taking them too, Naruto boasted as he stepped forward. Why don't we have a little practice battle right here and now? Team 7 versus Team Sand Creeps. Wait. Called Sakura, but her plea went unnoticed. You know, that's not a half-bad idea, is it? Said Kankuro with a mischievous grin. What do you say, Gaara? Why don't we finish off these brats? Don't. Scolded Temari, while glancing nervously at Gaara, who was now staring hungrily at Sasuke. We can't risk him losing control. Not now. And I've got to go to work, Sakura added desperately. You two will be outnumbered. This won't take 5 minutes, Sasuke gloated and cracking his knuckles. No. Stop it. Sakura cried, and stepping between her teammates and the sand ninjas. We are not fighting them. We are going home. I second that. Chimed in Temari, her voice dripping with annoyance. Now, why don't all you boys get your testosterone levels in check? If you're planning to do something stupid, save it for after the exams so we don't get disqualified. Ah. But that's no fun, whined Naruto, but his competitive spirit was finally draining. Temari rolled her eyes and snapped her fingers at her teammates. Let's go, guys. Be patient. We can kick their asses later. Sakura caught Temari's eye and mouthed a small thank you before the sand ninjas made their ways back towards the village core. Thank the gods that didn't escalate. A fight with a boy who killed ninjas for sport was the last thing they needed right now. Team 7 stood around awkwardly until the others were well out of earshot. Well. If there isn't any more fighting going on, want to go grab lunch with me, Sakura-chan? Naruto tried. Sakura shook her head and reached down for her bag of training gear. She winced profoundly at the motion. No, Naruto. Like I just said, I've got to go to work. Oh, right. Well, what about you, SAS? Wait. No. You aren't invited, Sasuke. We are not hanging out until you replace my pair of burnt pants. Deal, Sasuke answered, a little too quickly. Sakura rolled her eyes. There was no way in hell Naruto was getting any new pants. With that, Naruto took off for the nearest ramen restaurant after claiming that he was going to die of starvation if he didn't go immediately, leaving Sasuke and Sakura to clean up the training grounds. When all of the weapons were retrieved, Sakura approached her teammate hesitantly. Despite her living in his flat, they hadn't been alone together in ages. Hi, she said as she approached the tree Sasuke was organizing his things under. He cast her a quick glance before turning back to his bag. Hey, he answered bluntly without saying anything more. Sakura paused to watch him in silence for a moment. A part of her expected him to initiate the conversation, perhaps to ask about her injury, her invasion of his bedroom, or even thank her for leaving the food in his fridge. He did none of the sort, however. Sakura frowned. But then a thought occurred to her. Are you training with Kakashi-sensei tomorrow evening? She asked. He paused. No, he said while standing up and brushing himself off. We can train together like before. Sakura bit her lip. Here goes. That's not exactly what I meant, she said, and ignoring her powerful urge to run and hide. This was going to be extremely awkward. Sasuke raised his eyebrows as he slung the bag over his shoulders. What is it then? He asked, finally turning around to look at her. After a deep breath, she said, well, Kakashi-sensei had a word with my parents. And, long story short, they're expecting you over for dinner tomorrow. He stared at her blankly for a moment before realization crossed his features. I see, he said quietly. He looked to the side, seemingly distracted by something in the distance, before turning away and starting his walk towards the village. Sakura hobbled after him with a hand pressed to her aching back, and suddenly felt very anxious for reasons she couldn't quite explain. Look, I don't want to do this any more than you do, she said hurriedly. But if you just come over once, my parents will leave us alone. You'll never have to see them again. Yeah, he replied a little dazedly, his eyes fixated on the ground. He was clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Either that or pissed off. I'm sorry about this, Sakura mumbled, feeling her face darken. I shouldn't have brought it up at all. We can always stage a quick breakup and pretend none of this ever happened. That option posed a potential way out of this mess, though it might open the door to a new slew of drama. No. It's fine, Sasuke finally said. He pulled his eyes away from the ground and shoved his hands in his pockets. I just haven't done anything like this since before the massacre. His statement caught Sakura so off guard that her breathing hitched. Now that hadn't occurred to her at all. Aside from the odd lunch with Team 7, Sasuke probably hadn't eaten in a group setting since before his family was murdered all of those years ago. Sakura's heart clenched as she cast him a nervous glance. Well, if it helps, I'm pretty sure my parents already like you. They haven't found out about the broken window yet, she tried with a tentative smile, unsure if Sasuke was in the mood for humor. That was your fault, anyways, he replied with a smirk, and to Sakura's relief, the conversation lightened from there on out. Crap. This dinner was going to be a bigger deal than she'd anticipated, and not only for her, but for Sasuke as well. And all Sakura could do now was pray that her parents decided to go easy on him. Chapter 20 Past the Threshold. With the Chunin selection exams only 2 days away, Sakura was scrambling to stock up on medical supplies, squeeze in some last-minute training, and set up a few more booby traps to further ninja-proof her bedroom. She was anticipating a prolonged separation from the time travel scroll while she was in the Forest of Death, so she needed to ensure that the traps were effective. With that thought in mind, Sakura took a few extra precautionary measures, such as sealing her bedroom door shut with a jutsu, to keep her parents a safe distance away, dipping each shuriken and kunai in a debilitating poison, and developing an antidote for said poison in case another disastrous accident took place, like if Sasuke decided to crash through her window and get himself stabbed in the leg again. Speaking of Sasuke and her family, Sakura couldn't help the bubbly anticipation that surfaced at the thought of the fast approaching meet the boyfriend dinner. Well, he wasn't actually her boyfriend, but Sakura's parents didn't know that part. I'd better not screw this up, Sakura thought anxiously. Because if she and Sasuke let on that this whole thing was a scam, the trust between her and her parents would surely suffer some damage. And if Kakashi too found out they were lying, he might be less keen to support Sakura in future times of need. Also, what if Sasuke didn't get along with her family? Sakura had a feeling that her mother was already sold on the prospect of her daughter dating the Uchiha heir, but she wasn't so certain about her father. If her parents disapproved of Sasuke, it wasn't like Sakura could stop spending time with him considering how he was her teammate, training partner, and her only real confidant in this confusing new life. Sakura was finding herself anxious on her teammate's behalf too. His unanticipated emotional reaction to her invitation was playing on a loop in her head. This silly dinner wasn't worth bringing about any painful or traumatizing memories. It was surprising enough that Sasuke didn't refuse her offer point blank because it wasn't like they were really dating. In fact, in the broad scheme of things, tonight was completely and utterly pointless. That's right. It's just a silly dinner, Sakura, she reminded herself over and over again as she made her way home from the training grounds after spending another afternoon working on taijutsu with Lee. This is just a small, insignificant event that means nothing to the time travel mission. You aren't facing Zabuza, Gaara, or Orochimaru for goodness sake. This is just something I've been fantasizing about for my entire life. Alright, who was she kidding? On top of her nervousness, Sakura was a little excited. After all, the boy she'd been pursuing for her entire existence was coming over to meet her family. Even if it was just an act, the occasion held some symbolism that Sakura couldn't quite shake. Alas, when Sasuke showed up at her front door on Saturday evening, Sakura was wearing the pale, green summer dress Ino used to tell her brought out her eyes, a lacy white headband she'd totally forgotten about owning, and even some basic silver jewelry. She was feeling a tad disoriented when she threw open the front door, since, as usual, her mother's meal preparation was running far behind schedule and the house had been a mess up until 3 minutes prior. Regardless, she was pleased to find that Sasuke had dressed up a little himself. Well, it was more like he'd ditched the shorts for a pair of black pants and paired them with a dark gray top. His hair was an unruly mess as always, but that look seemed to suit him, as Sakura and every other female, and most males, in the village would attest to. Hi, she said a little breathlessly and smoothing down her own hair as she led him inside. But Sasuke never got a chance to answer her because Mabuki had flocked over to the hallway to greet him with a barrage of comments like "Let me take your shoes. Do you have a coat? I hope you're hungry. How was the walk here? Why, don't you look handsome this evening?" Sakura cringed and shrunk back against the wall. The poor guy hadn't even made it out of the entryway and already her mother was swooning. They were ushered into the sitting room across from the kitchen while Mabuki finalized the dinner preparations. There, they joined Kizashi, who was lounging on an armchair and enjoying a glass of red wine. At the sight of Sasuke, he beamed widely. Well, he boomed while raising his glass. What a pleasure it is to have the sole heir to the famous Uchiha clan in our household. Sakura felt a strong urge to bury her face in her hands. To her relief, Sasuke didn't seem too fazed by her father's in-your-face demeanor. The pleasure is mine, he answered with a polite nod before taking a seat on the couch. Sakura followed suit, relieved that Sasuke seemed accustomed to interacting with authoritative adults, perhaps because he was raised attending formal events on the regular. As far as Konoha standards went, his family had been royalty. Sakura grimaced. Her own dinners were the absolute furthest thing from royalty. So if Sasuke had any grand expectations for the evening, well, he was in for quite a shock. "Can I get you a drink?" Kizashi offered, beckoning toward the glass in his hands. "Dad!" Sakura scolded and shooting him a pointed look. "We're not of age yet." Sakura's inner nearly 18-year-old self was screaming in protest. An alcoholic beverage would do her nerves wonders right about now. But considering her brain's bizarre state of affairs, she still wasn't sure how old her brain was. It was probably best she avoided mind-altering substances for a long time. Kizashi merely shrugged. In these times kids are working younger, marrying younger, dying younger. I don't see why you can't have a drink if you want to. This ninja business is dangerous work and I don't want either of you to be deprived of the wonders of alcohol before, you die or have kids or something. Oh my god. Sasuke hadn't been in her house for 5 minutes, and already Sakura was embarrassed beyond belief. Thankfully, the excruciating exchange in the sitting room was cut short because Mabuki called them in to eat soon after. But the dinner itself wasn't any better. Both of Sakura's parents had poured themselves several glasses of wine throughout the course of the meal and seemed to be having a splendid time questioning their guest. At first the questions weren't so bad. When Sakura's mother asked Sasuke about his scores in the academy, he had no trouble impressing Sakura's parents. He had the highest marks in their year, after all, even higher marks than Sakura's. Soon after, when he was asked about his hobbies, Sakura learned that Sasuke enjoyed hiking and reading in his spare time. Unfortunately, everything seemed to go downhill from there. "You are such a responsible young man," Mabuki gushed while swirling around the wine in her glass. "It must have been so hard growing up all alone. But Makoto raised you well, didn't she? I always admired your mother. She was a very kind woman." "Indeed," chimed in Kazashi. "Your entire family was very kind, in fact. Except that Itachi fellow. Your older brother. I'm not sure what went wrong with him. I'm surprised you're even related to him, frankly." Sakura wanted to slam her face onto the table. Was this really happening right now? Talking about Itachi was off limits with Sasuke around. Apparently her parents never got that memo. She cast a nervous glance at Sasuke, whose expression was as blank as always. He gave a polite nod and simply said, "Thank you." Oh, how embarrassing. They were treading on very thin ice now, and Sakura didn't dare venture to imagine what was going through her teammate's mind. He probably hated them all. Could her father have picked a worse topic of conversation? "Now, Sasuke. Have you had any past girlfriends?" "Oh. Yes, apparently he could." "No," Sasuke answered between bites of food, his tone casual. He must have been masking some sort of contempt for them all now. "I find that hard to believe," Mabuki said with a wink. "Oh God, oh God, oh God, please stop." Somehow, Sasuke didn't seem too fazed by the comment. He merely smirked while keeping his attention locked on his food. "And you ended up choosing our Sakura," said Kazashi with a fond smile. "Well, you clearly haven't spent much time with her yet if you still think she's dateable," he added with a snort, which was followed by both of Sakura's parents falling into fits of laughter. "Guys," Sakura groaned and rubbing her temples. And, to her horror, Sasuke looked rather amused by both her father's comment and her reaction to it. Unfortunately, the conversation took an even worse turn after that. Sakura's parents felt the atmosphere to be just right to start spewing embarrassing stories from Sakura's childhood, her quirks, her early academy blunders, and other things that she had been perfectly content with Sasuke not knowing. Ever. Sure, she was relieved that the attention was diverted from Sasuke's personal life, but it was at the expense of them talking about hers instead. "Mom," Sakura groaned, feeling her face glowing all shades of red. "Sasuke does not need to know about my imaginary ninja friends from when I was a kid." But that comment only triggered another round of laughter, so she decided to shut up and pretend this whole thing wasn't happening. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they got through dessert and Sakura caught a quick break in the conversation to ask Sasuke if he would like to take a walk with her. Pleasantries were exchanged, Sasuke shook Kazashi's hand, which earned him a fond clap on the shoulder, and praised Mabuki's cooking, which landed him a spine-snapping hug, before Sakura practically yanked Sasuke out the door by the arm. "Look, I am really sorry about that," Sakura said while twisting her fingers together anxiously. "I knew it would be brutal, but I didn't think they'd be that obnoxious." "It's fine," Sasuke answered flatly. His hands were shoved in his pockets and he was gazing towards the setting sun. It was a rather beautiful evening for a stroll. The sky was painted various shades of oranges and pinks along the horizon. A warm glow was sweeping through the village, aside from the spots where long shadows were cast by rows of houses lining the streets, and a gentle breeze sent pleasant chills down Sakura's bare arms and legs. She stole a glance at her teammate, who she presumed was hiding his true feelings about the torturous experience at her parents' house. His expression was as unreadable as it always was and his gaze was pointed at something far in the distance. They turned down a path that led to a small park in the heart of town. Sasuke didn't make any indication as to where they were going, but Sakura figured they would make their way back to his place eventually, as they usually did. Even though they were free from her parents' presences, Sakura wasn't feeling much relief yet. This walk felt like it was dragging out forever and Sasuke's silence was infuriating Sakura more than it usually did. He was probably feeling some combination of anger and annoyance after that dinner. But why wasn't he saying anything? Sure, he was an actions more than words guy, but his actions just weren't making any sense these days. He accepted the food she left in his fridge, but he never thanked her or even mentioned it. He aggressively slammed her against a tree with no remorse, but then punched Naruto square in the face before he could get anywhere near Sakura in their sparring match. He forced her to stay at his place, but had made no apparent attempts to ward off the alleged stalker who was breaking into Sakura's bedroom. Sakura cursed her stupidity. She just had to go and pick the most emotionally unstable, unreadable, insensitive human being on the planet to develop feelings for. And now that they were pretending to date, he was 50 times harder to understand. Have they met him too? Sasuke asked suddenly, breaking the silence and pulling Sakura from her thoughts. What? She asked, rather abruptly. She had no idea what he was talking about. His eyes were trained on the path ahead of them. Your parents. I'm asking if they've met that guy you have history with or whatever, he muttered. Wait, seriously? Sakura had nearly forgotten that Sasuke thought she had some sort of sadistic ex-boyfriend who she was devoting her life to saving. And the irony of it all was that this very person he was making all these false assumptions about was himself. Well, the Sasuke of her old life. And, alright, he'd turned out to be rather sadistic in the end. And it was true that she was determined to save him. But it wasn't like they had any real romantic history like this Sasuke apparently thought they did. No. Not like that, she answered, and forcing her eyes to focus on the rows of trees lining the path. And if they had met him, it's not like they would be able to tell him apart from you, anyways. She closed her eyes and let out a sigh. Her life was such a ridiculous mess. Why the hell was Sasuke asking her about her history in the first place? Of all things he could bring up, why this? And then, as if Sakura's emotions needed any other reasons to go into overdrive. Sasuke grabbed her hand. She flinched profoundly and spun around to look at him, alarmed, but he paid no notice to her reaction. Kakashi's nearby, he said dismissively. Oh, Sakura answered, and fighting the color rising in her face. Of course this was about Kakashi. And once she calmed down enough to focus her senses, she also felt Kakashi's presence lurking somewhere ahead on the nearby streets. They continued their walk in silence. Sasuke seemed content in his own thoughts, and despite how her mind and hormones were now in overdrive, the rest of the walk was rather relaxing. They'd adjusted their grips on each other a few times until the hand-holding became more comfortable, though it was still pretty far from natural. Sakura didn't dare look his way again, especially because he seemed to be in an unusually quiet and reflective mood that she was a little weary about interrupting. She couldn't help but notice, however, now that her worries over the Chunin exams were subsiding, that the dynamic between them was strikingly different than it used to be. Would Sasuke ever have held her hand like this in her old life? Would he ever have agreed to spending an evening with her family, let alone walking through the park with her? Sakura felt her chest tighten sadly because she knew exactly what the answer to those questions was. Do you still want to train tonight? She asked a few minutes later as they neared his house. Her question seemed to break his train of thought because he straightened up and blinked a few times before answering. I'm just going to bed, he said as he used his free hand to pull his key from his pocket. Oh. Okay, she said, a little surprised by his uncharacteristic answer. He led her up the steps and only let her hand go after he opened the front door. Sakura spent the night practicing her medical ninjutsu in Sasuke's living room. She decided not to venture out to the training grounds alone, with it being only 2 nights before the Chunin exams. The village was probably crawling with foreign ninjas just itching for a fight. So instead, she set up her stack of textbooks on the floor and worked on channeling massive amounts of her medical chakra at once. Unfortunately, given the lack of live patients or lab animals to practice on, she was forced to practice on her own arms and legs, by inflicting minor injuries to them with her weapons. But after only about an hour of training in this manner, Sakura started feeling tired herself. She'd expended a considerable amount of chakra and her limbs were starting to ache from being damaged and patched up again in such rapid succession. So after mopping up all traces of her blood from the floor, she changed into the pair of her spare pajamas she kept in Sasuke's hallway closet, washed up in his bathroom, then curled up on the couch. She fell asleep instantly. But she wasn't asleep for long. After barely a few hours, Sakura was awoken by a noise in the kitchen across the hall. It was only the soft creak of a cupboard opening, but Sakura, who was conditioned to sleep with one eye open, roused abruptly at the disturbance. It was pitch black. She inched her head upwards, in the direction of the kitchen, which was normally viewable from her angle on the couch, but her eyes hadn't adjusted to the darkness yet and she couldn't see a thing. Her heart rate quickened and she kept her body as still as possible, listening intently. A moment later, she heard soft padding on the tiles of Sasuke's kitchen floor. Someone was in there. Without further delay, Sakura pried the kunai out from under her pillow and dug blindly for the small lamp on the side table at the opposite end of the couch. She flicked on the light and sprang to her feet, weapon poised. The kitchen across the hall was still obscured by shadows, but Sakura was now able to make out a figure rummaging through the cabinets beside Sasuke's oven. The rummaging stopped as soon as Sakura turned on the light. "Sakura. Go to bed," came Sasuke's voice then. Relief washed over her. It was just him. But just to be on the safe side, because, for all she knew, this was some imposter using a transformation jutsu, she kept her guard up. "What are you doing?" she asked, holding her kunai ready at her hip as she crept across the hallway to the kitchen. The smooth, wooden floor tiles felt cold beneath her bare feet. But Sasuke didn't answer her and he resumed his rummaging. Her curiosity was steadily growing, and when she reached the entrance to the kitchen, she turned the kitchen light on the dimmest setting. Sasuke, who was standing across the kitchen with his back to her, froze. "Sasuke?" she asked slowly as she ventured across the kitchen to meet him, her grip steadily tightening on the kunai's handle. She couldn't help getting a suspicious vibe from the whole situation. "Yeah?" he answered without moving an inch, his tone cold and flat. What are you doing?" she repeated unsurely as she passed by the kitchen table and approached him near the oven. He didn't acknowledge Sakura or even move a muscle, which Sakura found terribly unnerving. What the hell was going on? And then, it was like something snapped inside him and he slammed the cupboard shut with a flare of aggression. "I said go to bed," he snarled without meeting her eyes. Sakura jumped back with alarm. He was gripping the countertop so hard that his knuckles were turning a ghostly white. Through the shock, Sakura felt a pulse of fear at his lethal tone, suddenly aware that she was in the presence of a guy who could snap her neck with a single, effortless strike if he really wanted to. And she shouldn't be afraid of Sasuke. Not anymore, not in this life. But that didn't stop her from retreating. Without a word, Sakura backed away, switched off the lights, and curled up on the couch with her knife and a million thoughts. But she didn't sleep. Sakura waited instead. Waited until Sasuke left the kitchen, 10 minutes later. Waited until he returned to his room and closed the door. Waited until his chakra signature flickered and lulled into sleep. And then she was back to the kitchen in the pitch black with her pocket flashlight. This was a terrible thing to do, this snooping around. She had no business meddling with her teammates' affairs, especially with something that was clearly causing him some sort of emotional turmoil. But her curiosity got the best of her. What on earth was Sasuke hiding in there? She started scanning the cabinets, opening the doors as soundlessly as she could, though she couldn't stop every squeak, and praying that Sasuke didn't hear. Sakura wasn't entirely unfamiliar with his kitchen since she spent most of her evenings in there, and she'd even prepared food for him on a few occasions. But she hadn't explored every nook and cranny. "Okay. If I don't find anything suspicious in 5 minutes, I'm just going to head to bed and pretend nothing happened," Sakura told herself firmly, because she knew that if Sasuke woke again, it probably wouldn't end well. That was when she stumbled on a tiny drawer she couldn't open. It was only a few inches wide and it was stuck closed. Sakura gave it a few hard yanks before bending closer to examine it. It didn't take long for her to realize that it wasn't sealed with any physical devices. It was sealed with chakra. Not with a special, complicated jutsu or anything, but with just enough that any normal amount of human strength couldn't pry it open. Good thing Sakura had plenty of abnormal strength at her disposal. Charging up her own chakra to her fingers, she gripped the edges of the drawer and gave it a firm pull, and, to her relief, the drawer finally gave and slid open in her hands. And what she found inside rendered Sakura speechless. Pills. Containers upon containers of pills. And whether or not this was what Sasuke had been looking for in his angry, sleepy stupor, these drugs were now harnessing Sakura's attention. Why did he have all these? Her first thought was that, perhaps, all this time, Sasuke had some kind of illicit drug addiction. But the prescription labels told her otherwise. These drugs had been prescribed to him legally. But, why? Most of the tiny bottles appeared to be unopened, except for one, which, upon a brief inspection, Sakura recognized as pill with strong sedative properties. In fact, it was among the strongest of sleeping pills that Sakura had prescribed in her past life. Finding sleeping pills in the hands of a ninja wasn't uncommon, given their irregular sleeping patterns and the trauma many experienced after missions. But in the hands of a ninja so young? Well, it wasn't unheard of. But it was rarer. The rest of the drawer was filled with common remedial pills, anti-inflammatories, unfinished vials of antibiotics, and immune system boosters. But then her trained eye landed on the 5 bottles at the back, all of which were unopened, and all of which were a different brand of antidepressant. Why did he have these? Were these prescribed to him, and if so, why wasn't Sasuke taking them? All this time, had Sasuke been suffering right under her nose in ways that she, a medical specialist, should have recognized? What else was he hiding? Her mind was brimming with questions. But she knew it would be best for her to close the drawer now and pretend she never saw its contents in the first place. After all, she could find out more about Sasuke's medical profile on her own. She wasn't the hospital's hot shot intern for nothing. And that's just what Sakura set out to do on Sunday morning and one day before the start of the Chunin exams. At the crack of dawn, long before Sasuke woke, Sakura slipped out to the hospital after making a quick detour at her parents' house to grab her work uniform. Sakura wasn't scheduled to work today, but she'd gained enough of a reputation that no one ever questioned it when she was there. It wasn't like she ever had a shortage of work to do there anymore. Right when Sakura walked in fact, she was ushered to the surgery wing to help with a heart transplant on a young woman who was beyond the help of medical jutsu alone. She monitored the procedure, distributed tools, and provided plenty of advice to ensure everything went smoothly. Immediately after, she helped a new family physician with one of her first regular checkups, set a broken wrist, and consulted a psychiatrist about the appropriate prescription for a patient in the trauma wing. Sure, Sakura wasn't getting paid to do this. Heck, today she wasn't even getting paid at all. But manning the hospital in an authoritative, jack-of-all-trades role felt natural to her. It still came as a bit of a surprise how much the other healthcare workers trusted her advice so readily, given her age, but she had a sneaking suspicion that I let slip Sakura's upcoming, tentative, promotion. That would explain all of this newfound respect she was getting. Sakura wasn't complaining in the least bit. It was a huge relief to finally kiss her filing days goodbye. But, of course, on the one day Sakura actually wanted to go back to the filing section, she got held up in every way imaginable. Finally, after about 4 hours of unpaid work, Sakura made it to the wing of the hospital where patients' records were stored. There was nothing unethical about snooping through Sasuke's medical files, she decided. After all, she had been the personal physician for the majority of her friends in her previous life, and could even spew out their medical histories like they were written on the back of her hand. But Sasuke, the person she thought about most and spent so much time with, was the one person who she knew nothing about. He could have an asymptomatic terminal illness for all she knew. And as Team 7's medical ninja, it was essential she was well versed in her teammates' medical conditions, Sakura reasoned. She was entitled to this knowledge. Sakura scanned the shelves for Sasuke's file, a little hurriedly because if someone caught her in there, they'd probably pull her away to help with some other medical procedure across the hospital. but thankfully, after only a minute, she found it and tore it from the shelf. She stared down at the pale green folder and was greeted by a familiar scowl. A small mugshot of her teammate was on the top right corner to accompany a short list of basic demographic facts, like his age, birth date, and blood type. Sakura only scanned the list briefly because that wasn't what she was here for. She was really after was whatever was inside his folder: any medical complications, specialist appointments, rare diagnoses, medical regimes. So, without further delay, Sakura opened the file to find that it was empty. Sakura was fuming. She'd just wasted her entire morning on a wild goose chase for nothing. And on the day before the Chunin exams, she could have spent those precious hours training or stocking up on medical supplies for the forest of death. But, somehow, the hospital managed to lose Sasuke's medical records. And not only that, but all medical history on his deceased family members too, which she checked up on after shoving his empty file back onto the shelf. Some idiot must have tossed the files away after the massacre, including Sasuke's, for some reason. What a pathetic, rudimentary error. Medical personnel were told time and time again to hold on to the medical records of those killed in combat. And, of course, just when she needed it most, all records of the entire existence of the esteemed Uchiha clan had up and vanished. Somebody was going to pay for this. It took a solid half-hour of aimless wandering through the village for Sakura to rid herself of thoughts of the missing files and Sasuke's mysterious medical history. He clearly wasn't about to die of a chronic illness anytime soon, since he made it to at least late teenagehood in her previous life. So with that thought in mind, Sakura managed to calm herself down enough to focus. Right. So the Chunin exam started tomorrow. There must be something she should be doing right now. Hey, Sakura-chan! Trumpeted a voice from behind her. She whirled around to find the glowing face of her beloved, noisy blonde teammate. What's up, Naruto? She asked with a smile. He skidded to a halt when he was immediately before her. Nothing, he said with a cheeky grin. Nothing at all. Sakura folded her arms. The mischievous glint in his eyes told her otherwise. What is this about? She asked, eyebrows raised. Nothing. He repeated, stubbornness filling his tone. And that's the point. I'm so bored. Let's get lunch. Well then. Naruto's forwardness never failed to surprise her. Sakura had to admit that the prospect of getting food was highly appealing to her at the moment, given how she'd just worked an unexpectedly long, exhausting shift without pausing for a break. Sure, let's go, she said with a chuckle. As anticipated, Naruto's face lit up instantly. For real? Yes. He exclaimed, punching the air dramatically before grabbing her arm. Come on. I need ramen. And that's how Sakura found herself in Ichiraku on Sunday afternoon with her bonehead of a best friend, or at least, former best friend and current teammate/new friend. She had to admit, despite his prominently less mature demeanor, Naruto was such a glowing ball of energy that she couldn't resist feeling at ease in his presence. So how's your training going? She asked before taking her first slurp of the hot meal. To her surprise, Naruto responded with a sheepish smile. Good. Well, I've been training with someone from a different team. So I've learned some new stuff. Sakura was surprised by this piece of information. Did he already start training with Jiraiya? Or maybe he was talking about Konohamaru? Who? She asked with interest. Hinata, Naruto answered through a mouth stuffed with noodles. I ran into her the other day, and since I couldn't find you guys, I asked her to train with me instead. That was unexpected. Sakura couldn't think of two ninjas with more opposite fighting styles either: Hinata, who struck with the grace and poise of the artful, majestic Hyuga, and, well, Naruto, who basically did whatever the hell he wanted as loudly and violently as possible. But if her abilities were rubbing off on Naruto in some way, well, the result might be pretty interesting. It's not that you and the asshole aren't good enough to train with or anything, Naruto added while ducking his head and peering up at her with wide eyes. So I hope you aren't mad. Oh no, Sakura answered with a dismissive wave. I've been training with Lee anyways. Naruto's eyebrows shot up. Who? Whoa. It hadn't occurred to Sakura that Naruto hadn't become properly acquainted with Rock Lee yet. He's, a gen and a year older than us. He's taking the exams too. This is weird. I'll have to introduce them. Though she vaguely recalled an aggressive battle taking place between the three boys when they were introduced in her past life, Lee was certainly a valuable ally to have. He saved their asses last time she was in the Forest of Death, after all. Naruto shrugged. No clue who that is, he said. But then his face contorted into one of his signature sneaky looks. Is dickhead pissed you're training with this Lee guy? Sakura rolled her eyes. Sasuke doesn't know. And I'm sure he won't care. I doubt that, Naruto said with a snicker. But I don't see why you don't just dump him already. You're way out of his league. He's overprotective and grouchy. Sakura's thoughts instinctively returned to Sasuke's drawer full of pills. It couldn't hurt to see if Naruto knew anything about Sasuke's medical condition, could it? Not that she really expected him to. Even though they'd only been on the same team for a few months, they sort of knew each other in their academy years, right? I don't mean to change the subject, Naruto, Sakura tried, while swirling her chopsticks around in her bowl and staring at it determinedly. But, you don't know why Sasuke might need to take any medicine, do you? It's just, as the team's medical ninja, it's important I know your medical backgrounds. And Sasuke's medical information is missing from the hospital. She cast her blonde teammate a hesitant glance. Oh, sure I do, Naruto answered with a casual nod. You mean the pills? Sakura's jaw just about slammed into the table. What? She gasped and resisting her strong urge to rise to her feet. How in hell's name did Naruto know about this? Right now, he and Sasuke were sworn rivals. Calling them friends was even a little premature, whereas Sakura practically lived in Sasuke's damn house. To her surprise, Naruto just laughed. Relax, Sakura-chan, he said, and gripping her arm across the table. It's just for the usual post-trauma stuff. I was offered some too when I was a kid, but my tragedy happened when I was too young to remember it. He paused. It's an orphan thing, I guess. You know, it's harder to cope with things like that without a family around. Post-trauma? Of course, Sakura thought, and putting her head in her hands. How could she have been so blind? What kind of unearthly god wouldn't develop post-traumatic stress after watching their parents get murdered on a loop for days on end at the age of 8? And since it appeared Sasuke wasn't actually taking his prescribed medication, his symptoms must either be minimal or hidden very well. Sakura was furious with herself now. I'm such a bad friend. To both of you, she groaned into her hands. Relax, Sakura-chan, Naruto said, and pulling back out that cheery grin of his. You're a great friend. But then he scrunched up his face in concentration. Well, only if you pay for my lunch. Sakura managed a weak smile. Tell you what, Naruto said while setting down his chopsticks. How about we hit the training grounds? You know, blow off some steam before the exam tomorrow? He had a point, Sakura realized as her own proper smile sprouted. It wasn't like she had anything else to do. Sure, she said, and fishing for the last bites of ramen in her bowl. Just give me 10 minutes to go home and change. Sakura spent the evening training with Naruto, just some light sparring and target practice before making her way back home for dinner. It was a refreshing evening that proved to be a perfect distraction from the stress of the upcoming exams and her worries for her other teammate, who she hadn't seen all day. Sakura couldn't stop the guilt from welling up inside her at the thought of what Naruto said over lunch. You know, it's harder to cope with things like that without a family around. Her heart clenched. Maybe she'd offer to do something really nice for him that night before they went to bed, like bring him some food or polish his weapons. Just to let him know that she was there. Sakura. Mabuki called upon her arrival to her parents' house, and pulling Sakura from her thoughts. You got something in the mail I think you'd better have a look at. Intrigued, Sakura entered the kitchen and took the scroll from her mother's offering hand. She pulled it open and immediately felt her stomach drop with disbelief. Dear Sakura Haruno. The Hokage requests your attendance in his office at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Lateness for the first exam, which begins at 9 a.m., will be pardoned should the meeting last longer than 1 hour. Regards. Ibiki Marino. Sakura slapped her forehead. What now? Chapter 21 Unveiled. Sakura slept through her alarm the following morning. After a moment of staring at her ceiling in a daze, Sakura whipped her head up off the pillow because it struck her that she only had 10 minutes to be at the Hokage Tower. And from there, race back to the academy for the first exam. Damn it. Of all mornings to sleep in. In a frenzy, she pulled on her training gear, including her black-heeled boots, gloves, and waistband, gathered her things, wolfed down some fruit and toast, and booked it out of Sasuke's flat without a word to its owner, whose chakra signature she could detect somewhere within the depths of his bedroom. Sakura hadn't spoken to Sasuke about the pill incident yet. She honestly never had the chance. After Sakura read Ibiki's letter the previous night, in fact, she'd spent the evening packing her things, bidding her parents farewell, ensuring her bedroom's booby traps were in working order, and officially parting with the time travel scroll, which caused her a tinge of dread, as it always did before she departed for lengthy missions. By the time she stumbled into Sasuke's flat to sleep, it was late at night, Sasuke was nowhere in sight, and she was far too exhausted to wait up for him. And so she succumbed to the allure of his plush couch and fell into a deep sleep instantly. So deep that her cumbersome alarm clock didn't stand a chance. When Sakura stepped outside, fully clad in her training gear and filled with adrenaline after the sleeping through the alarm scare, she was greeted by a cool morning summer breeze and blinding sunbeams. She was feeling energized after the long and much-needed sleep, but with that energy came a whirlwind of nerves. Her previous worries resurfaced as she hurried down the winding village roads to the Hokage Tower. Was participating in the Chunin exams with the others really going to help her with the time travel mission? What if Sound was plotting to infiltrate the exams anyways and Sand turned on them again? And if any of that happens again, what can I do about it? What Sakura needed now more than ever was an influential reputation. And the only way she could think of gaining one was by becoming a Chunin and obtaining that hospital promotion the council members promised her. Then, and only then, did she have a chance of getting people to take her seriously when she started making radical claims about Orochimaru wanting to attack the village, the Akatsuki's whereabouts, and the danger Sasuke was in. Whatever problems waited on the horizon were too big for her to face alone. And if Sakura had learned anything from being on a team with Naruto Uzumaki and Kakashi Hatake for so many years, it was that the bond between comrades was one of the greatest strengths in the world. Sakura would never let herself be a lonely, cold-hearted avenger like Sasuke, who tried to shoulder all the pain himself and shut everyone out. In her old life, she'd watched him crumble beneath its weight and lose his way entirely. No, she could not afford for that to happen to her, not when she had the weight of the entire ninja world on her shoulders. If she tried to carry it all alone, it would destroy her. Sakura's strides grew bigger and more confident as she neared the tower. She was doing the right thing. It was a beautiful morning, she was about to show off her skills in the exams, and nothing could bring her down. Not even whatever the Hokage had to tell her in his office. Good morning, Sakura, Sarutobi greeted from his desk when she stepped through the grand front doors. I promise I won't keep you long. I understand that the first exam starts in an hour. But please, do have a seat. He beckoned towards the chair facing him. Yes sir, Sakura answered with a polite bow and doing just as she was told. There were 2 Jonin attendants who Sakura didn't recognize standing on either side of the Hokage, and aside from that, the room looked the same as it always did, albeit significantly more tidy than when Tsunade held office here. The floors weren't littered with piles of paper and wine bottles. Instead, the walls were lined with neatly organized bookshelves and filing cabinets. The picture frames of the previous Hokage were as shiny as she'd ever seen them. It was weird. After instructing one of his attendees to shut the doors, Sarutobi rested his elbows on the desk and cleared his throat. I called you here, Miss Haruno, to extend my thanks for your brave allocations against the Sound Village last week. It triggered the launch of an investigation. As you may have guessed, the results shed light on a few misgivings that gave me cause to revoke the Sound Village's invitation to the Chunin selection exams. She bowed her head respectfully and waited for him to elaborate. But he simply stared at her over his clasped fingers, the smile lines etched deep in his aged face. Sakura started slowly and intertwining her own fingers on her lap. Is that all you wanted to tell me? She asked, raising her eyebrows. Much to her dismay, the Hokage nodded. Oh no, he doesn't. I spent the morning freaking out about missing my alarm for this. There was no way in hell. If you don't mind me asking, sir, what exactly were these misgivings you found? Why were they kicked out of the exams? And boy, did she ever want to know. Did they find one of Orochimaru's secret bases? Did they catch Orochimaru performing one of his twisted medical experiments? Or save any of his hostages? To her surprise, the Jonin on Sarutobi's left barked out a laugh that he proceeded to try masking as a cough. Everyone turned their attention towards him, and when he caught the Hokage's questioning stare, he abandoned his cover and faced Sakura. You're a kid, he snarled with a patronizing smirk. In what universe would you have the right to know the results of an A-ranked investigation? He laughed again and the other Jonin's mouth twitched into a smile. Sakura's temper flared, but she somehow managed to bite her tongue. He has no idea. Now, Sarutobi dismissed. Sakura is a very bright, young girl. Although, Sakura, I'm afraid they are right. Given your age-erm status, I cannot disclose precisely what was discovered, but since you are so insistent, you deserve to know that it was a matter of trade relations. Sakura's eyebrows shot up. Trade relations? She repeated, her anger fading into shock. That's it? But before Sarutobi could answer her, and before Sakura realized that she probably should have kept her mouth shut, the office doors were slammed open. Hokage-sama, a deep, masculine voice rumbled through the room. A word. Sakura spun around to find Ibiki, Konoha's lead interrogator and the proctor of the first Chunin exam, standing in the entrance with a scowl on his face. His hands were folded under his long, black cloak and his sturdy, scarred jaw was clenched. The Jonin attendees flocked to the door and Sarutobi rose to his feet. Now, Ibiki? Don't you have an exam to oversee in only half an hour? He asked. Ibiki narrowed his eyes. I realize that, he snapped, clearly in no mood to beat around the bush. Sarutobi and the Jonin exchanged looks before the Hokage turned his attention to a very confused Sakura. Well, Sakura, I'm afraid we'll have to cut our conversation short for today. I believe we covered everything. I wanted to hold on a moment. He added as Ibiki turned away and stalked out of the office with both Jonin on his heels, leaving Sakura and the Hokage behind. Always so impatient, the old man sighed while gathering a small stack of papers from his desk and turning to the tall filing cabinet against the wall on his right. He unlocked the cabinet with a jutsu and shoved the papers inside. Now, Sakura, I gather that you know your way out from here. Or must I ask one of my assistants to lead the way? But Sakura's attention was locked on the filing cabinet, which was currently ajar with all of its contents in plain sight. It wasn't the cabinet itself, per se, that held her attention, but the rows of files inside. The files she immediately recognized as medical files. She could spot that pale green shade anywhere. But why on earth were there medical files in the Hokage's office? They were property of the hospital, unless they were being used for a dire criminal investigation. But that didn't explain why there were so many of them in there. There had to be hundreds. Sakura? She snapped her head up and caught the gentle gaze of the village hero. Oh. No escort. I'll be fine, thank you, she said hurriedly with a small bow. Good, Sarutobi said with a brisk nod before closing the cabinet door and performing a quick hand seal to secure it. He strode over to the office entrance. Good luck in the exams, Sakura, he added over his shoulder before rounding the corner and disappearing from sight. Now Sakura was left in a pickle. Did she do as she was told and race back to the academy for the start of the first exam? Or did she do some snooping in the Hokage's cabinets filled with suspicious medical files? You'd think that Sakura would have learned her lesson. For instance, she was recently nearly caught perusing Sasuke's secret medication drawer and breaking into the hospital. This was the Hokage's office of all places, and being caught snooping in here would surely have terrible consequences. But that wasn't stopping her. Sakura's raw curiosity held her in place. This was probably the only time she'd ever wind up alone in the Hokage's office without anyone watching over her shoulder, after all. Sakura needed to know why those files were here instead of in the hospital where they belonged. And, perhaps the most intriguing matter of all was whether this discovery would provide some indication of where the Uchiha clan's missing medical files were. Are they here? And if they are, why? She couldn't wait a second longer. In a heartbeat, Sakura was across the room where the Hokage had been standing moments prior. Right, he sealed the cabinet with a jutsu. Sakura was familiar with this very cabinet in her old life. Tsunade had made good use of it by cramming in sweaters, important files, and emergency wine bottles. As her apprentice, Sakura had often retrieved items from various places in this office. Could it be that the third Hokage used the very same jutsus to seal his files away? Well, there was one way to find out. Sakura proceeded to work through her mental list of hand seal combinations until, on her fourth try, she heard a soft click behind the door. Her pulse rate skyrocketed. It worked. She wrenched the cabinet open, not without a fervent glance over her shoulder, and snatched a random medical file. She froze. Mikoto Uchiha, it read. So the Uchiha clan files were in here after all. In the top corner of the file in Sakura's hand, there was a tiny photo of a stunning woman with long black hair and familiar striking features. There was no doubt about it, this file belonged to Sasuke's mother. And if Sasuke's mother's file was in here, surely his file was too. Without further delay, Sakura grabbed a handful of files to leaf through. She suspected she didn't have much time until she would be caught in here, so she vowed to get the hell out as soon as she found Sasuke's file. But in the process of pulling out the files, a scroll tumbled off the shelf and rolled across the floor, unraveling in the process. Sakura cursed her misfortune and chased after the scroll, snatching at it with her free hand. She set the files down on the floor beside her and crouched down to roll up the scroll, but she was distracted by a familiar name that practically leapt out from the paper. Itachi Uchiha. Sasuke's brother. Curiosity piqued, Sakura continued scanning the scroll's inky text. It didn't take her long to discern that it was a formal letter. It was filled with political jargon, official stamps, and signatures. What the hell was this thing? She unrolled the scroll a little further so that the document title was in plain view. Operation Elimination of the Uchiha Clan. Sakura's trek from the tower to the academy was a shell-shocked, emotionless trance. She didn't want to believe what she had just learned. But she'd read the letter through 7 times and there was no mistaking the cold, hard truth it revealed. The Uchiha clan massacre was planned. Planned by the Leaf Village. But, how? How could this have happened? How on earth did the village so convincingly manage to fool everyone into thinking that Sasuke's brother was solely responsible for the massacre? Was Itachi really the psychopath the village made him out to be? Did he even have a say in committing this crime? Why would the village elders want to eliminate its own citizens in the first place? And how was Sakura supposed to accept that her village, her people, her heart and soul, were responsible for the murder of so many innocent people? Did Sasuke ever find out about this? Could that be why he left the village in her previous life? Her heart was thumping painfully against her chest now. Or was she overreacting? What did it matter that Itachi killed them of his own accord or that he killed them on orders? But it did matter and Sakura knew it. And the weight of this knowledge was clouding her thoughts and tipping the world out of focus. Because one thing was for certain. My world took Sasuke's away. Without weighing the implications of her actions, Sakura slammed open the enormous double doors leading to the examination hall in the academy. It hadn't occurred to her that the loud entrance might make a scene, that she might be the last person to arrive, and that hundreds of anxious, high-strung genin would not be impressed by her disturbance. And that's exactly what happened. "Haruno," boomed Ibiki from the front of the room. He had apparently finished his chat with the Hokage. "You are just in time. Take your seat in row 14 and we can all begin." "Yes sir," she answered, noticing that her voice sounded much smaller than usual. And as she walked down the aisle between the desks, her heels clicking against the wood floorboards, she became acutely aware of how every shred of bloodlust in the room was now being directed at her. "Great. I've just become the target of all my competitors," she thought with a silent groan while trying not to look like a nervous wreck. And as she usually did in times of stress, her eyes instinctively sought out Naruto through the throng. He wasn't hard to spot up near the front, his blonde head bobbing up and down and his arms stretched up in attempt to catch her attention. "Sakura-chan." His voice sounded across the room in a failed effort to whisper. A small smirk graced her lips. That guy always found a way to calm her down no matter how stressed she was. But then she passed Sasuke's desk and was hurled back to square one. She caught his eye for a fleeting moment, got a taste of his ice-cold "where the hell have you been" glare, and immediately averted her eyes to the empty desk 3 rows ahead, which she presumed was her destination. She had to tell him. It was her duty, as Sasuke's friend and comrade, to make sure he knew the truth about his family members' deaths. But how on earth was she going to bring it up? And when? As soon as Sakura took her seat, Ibiki made an introductory speech about the first exam while putting particular emphasis on the no-cheating policy. Sakura rolled her eyes at how painstakingly obvious it was that they were expected to cheat, and wondered how her former self hadn't caught on to that sooner, and pulled out her pencil. Within minutes, the written exams were distributed and Ibiki shouted "begin." The examination hall was immediately silenced, aside from the sounds of flipping papers and scratching pencils. Sakura knew she could pass this test without writing a single word down on the page. She distinctly recalled Ibiki's twisted 10th question that simply required that the 3-man squad decided to stay in the exam room, despite the threat of being banned from all future Chunin exams, and they would pass. But she wrote anyways because the questions were simple. And the test taking might distract her from the thoughts that were growing louder and louder with each pencil stroke. She had to tell Sasuke about the letter immediately after the first exam. It wasn't fair for her to keep this information bottled up, it would drive her insane. But how could she face him? A terrible thought crossed her mind then. If Sakura told Sasuke that the village was responsible for murdering his family, would he be driven out of the village sooner? She knew that Sasuke was normally reasonably level-headed, but also that he tended to act impulsively and sometimes irrationally in emotionally charged moments. Was it fair to drop this information on him immediately before he took the most important test of his life, so far? But who was she to decide what information he could or couldn't handle? This was about his family and he deserved to know the truth. It would be selfish of her to withhold it from him, really. Sakura would have to suck it up and be the bearer of bad news. The messenger. He could take it and act on it in whatever way he pleased. Why should that concern her anyways? Because you're in love with him, idiot. When the exam ended, Sakura made a beeline for the washroom. She needed to be alone for a minute and gather her thoughts. Now that her emotional state was upside down, she was starting to get bad feelings about everything. To her relief, the washroom was empty. All the stall doors were slightly ajar and no detectable chakra signatures were in range. She went over to the sink and gazed at her reflection. Somehow, she appeared calm and collected, her green eyes bright, her hair neatly cascading to just above her shoulders, and her jaw set. But her mind was a mess. Something felt wrong, but Sakura couldn't put her finger on it. Yes, she was terrified to face Sasuke about her discovery in the Hokage's office, but there was something else nagging at her subconscious. Would she get caught for rummaging through the Hokage's cabinets? Well, no, that was highly improbable. Sakura knew there weren't any security cameras in there, and her gloves prevented her from leaving fingerprints behind. Well, in the rush of it all, I forgot to find Sasuke's medical file. Is that why I'm panicking? But that couldn't be it. Maybe it had to do with the exams? Although she had been wrapped in her thoughts during the written test, she'd caught a whiff of some unpleasant and distinctly familiar chakra signatures while she was writing. Maybe, to be on the safe side, she ought to warn someone in an authoritative position of potential dangers that awaited the competitors in the second exam. Even if there were none, it couldn't hurt if someone kept a careful watch for suspicious activity. The bathroom door flung open and someone walked in. Sakura noticed blonde hair in the mirror's reflection before she spun around to find herself face to face with Ino. Her heart clenched at Ino's hard, emotionless glare. How she wished their friendship could go back to how it used to be, where they had each other's backs through thick and thin, especially at a time like this. You passed, Ino said flatly before turning away and starting towards the stalls. It took Sakura a moment to process that Ino was talking about the exam. Yeah, she said, and before she could stop herself, added, good luck, pig. Ino paused and tilted her head to look at Sakura, who was trying to communicate her desperation with her eyes. I miss you. I need you, Ino. Let's forget our stupid differences and have each other's backs again. Please. Ino's expression remained emotionless. You too, forehead, she murmured before turning away again. When Sakura emerged from the bathroom, the examination hall was empty. She figured everyone had been ushered outside to the entrance of the enormous Forest of Death arena where the second exam would be held. Sakura pursed her lips, pumped chakra to her feet, and set out for the arena. It took her about 10 minutes to arrive at the arena, which was located deep in the forest on the village's outskirts. The vast clearing outside the area was packed with ninjas scrambling to find their teammates and their gates. It was a chaotic mess of bodies, voices, and chakra flares. How was she supposed to find Anko through all this? Sakura reasoned that alerting Anko, the proctor of the second exam, of the potential ensuing danger would be the most logical course of action. If anything terrible did happen in the exam, Anko would be far more likely to staunch it if she was already on the lookout. Sakura shouldered her way through crowd, keeping her eyes and ears peeled for someone familiar through the hum of chatter and chakra. And, much to her relief, not 2 minutes later, she did find someone she knew. Kakashi-sensei. She called, and approaching her sensei at a brisk jog. He wasn't Anko, but he was probably the second best option. Kakashi had been standing on the outskirts of the throng, his silver hair glinting in the sunlight and his free hand resting in his pocket. He lazily glanced up from his book. There you are, he said. You'd better go find the boys. They were looking for you. I know, she gasped and skidding to a halt as she neared him, her boots sliding along the slick dirt ground. I just need to talk to you for a second. You'd better make it quick, he answered, and snapping his book shut. I'll be out of the village in 10 minutes. Sakura blanched, her heart sinking. What, why? A mission, he said with a nonchalant shrug. I can't tell you the details, but I expect I'll be gone for up to 2 weeks. Sakura felt her jaw hang open. Seriously? Why the hell was he being sent on a mission now of all times? She certainly didn't remember this happening in her old life. Now there was no way he could look out for them during the exams. Kakashi seemed to sense her surprise and he smiled reassuringly. Don't worry. I know you 3 will do just fine. I gave you all invitations for a reason. That's not it, Sakura stammered, but she never got a chance to elaborate because that was when a pair of orange-clad arms wrapped around her from behind. Sakura-chan. A voice trumpeted in her ear, nearly causing her to jump right out of her skin. Sakura twisted herself loose of Naruto's grip and shoved him face first into the dirt. Don't do that. She shrieked, her fist raised threateningly as Naruto spat out a mouthful of dirt. That was when Sakura realized that Sasuke was standing there with his hands in his pockets, observing his teammates with his eyebrows raised. Sakura swallowed and turned back to her sensei, who was chuckling. Well, I'm glad you've all found each other, he said. Now get to your gate and do me proud, all right? Wait. Sakura cried through Naruto's excited whoops. She approached Kakashi and lowered her voice, though she knew the boys could hear her. Sensei, can you please tell Anko to keep a close watch things? You know, in case something goes wrong. She stared up at him with what she hoped was a pleading look, and prayed he wouldn't ask for details. Kakashi met her gaze. Does he get how serious this is? I'm sure Anko will do a fine job keeping things under control, he said calmly. Now hurry up, kids. But... Sakura started, only to be interrupted by Naruto grabbing her arm and tugging her through the crowd. Yeah, let's go. You don't want to be late 2 times in a row. Naruto cackled over his shoulder as he led the way. Sakura shot a nervous glance back at her sensei and caught his eye once more. Much to her relief, his expression had hardened and he gave a small, curt nod. He gets it. He will talk to Anko. Why were you late? Sasuke asked. Sakura jumped. She hadn't noticed him walking beside her. I was held up in a meeting, she lied while keeping her eyes trained on the ground. She was not prepared to provide a proper explanation and was thankful he didn't probe further. Well, it was pretty badass, Naruto said while spinning around to face his teammates. He placed his palms on the back of his head and continued to lead the way, walking backwards. You know, slamming those doors open and marching in like you owned the place. He grinned, blue eyes twinkling. Sakura shrugged. Yeah, well, I'm pretty sure everyone in that room hates me for it. Probably, Sasuke agreed in a rather flat tone. Sakura shot him a sideways glance to find Sasuke frowning into space. Was he upset with her? Being sarcastic? God, this guy is frustrating. He was impossible to read, made Sakura feel uncharacteristically self-conscious, and worst of all, I've got to tell him. That was when Naruto, who was still walking backwards, collided with someone. Oops. He said while spinning around, grinning sheepishly. Watch where you're Hinata-chan. Naruto stepped back to reveal a petrified-looking Hinata, who was standing there with her fur-lined jacket, black bob cut, hands clasped together, and an enormous blush on her cheeks. And Naruto-kun. She gasped. Sorry for getting in your way. She attempted to scurry along her path, but Naruto stretched an arm out around her shoulders and pulled her towards him. Sasuke. Sakura-chan. I want to formally introduce you to my new training partner, he announced, like he was showing off a shiny, new toy. Sasuke, who still had his hands in his pockets, appeared utterly disinterested, and Sakura, who was familiar with Hinata's dangerously low blood pressure, and her tendency to faint in Naruto's presence, kept a sharp watch on said girl, who was growing redder and looked about ready to collapse. Just wait until you see some of the moves she taught me. Hinata-chan showed me how to find all her chakra points and now I'm a pro at fisting gently. Naruto bellowed while giving Hinata's shoulder a firm pat. Hinata's hands flew up to her mouth and Sakura bit back a laugh. I don't think that's what it's called, Naruto, she chided while pumping medical chakra to her hands and approaching Hinata, whose eyes were rolling back into her head. Come on. Stay with me. Hinata-chan. Naruto gasped, finally cluing in that she was losing consciousness in his arms. Hey! Dumbass! What are you doing to my teammate? Called a new voice. Kiba emerged from the crowd on all fours, and made to lunge at Naruto and reclaim his teammate, but an enormous swarm of black insects blocked his path. A rough. Shino, not now. Kiba wailed, and swatting at the buzzing cloud of bugs. I'm trying to save Hinata. Shino, clad in his gray coat and black shades, appeared beside Kiba. Now is not the time for fighting, he hummed monotonously. We need to go to our gate. Yeah, that's right. Naruto yelled, and rounding on Hinata's teammates. Why fight now when we can kick your asses in the exams? Sakura shrunk back once Hinata was conscious again, not wanting to take part in the fiasco. She caught eyes with Sasuke, who was standing to her right, and who appeared to share her sentiments. Idiots, he muttered and nodding towards their rowdy classmates. I'll say, Sakura said with a nervous laugh and folding her arms. But as much as the others were driving her nuts, they were a great distraction from a certain plaguing thought. Now is my chance to tell him. No one else was in earshot. It was now or never. Sasuke, she said, taking a big gulp of air, and preparing for the worst. I need to talk to you about something, he interrupted. Sakura froze, completely shocked as he stole the words out of her mouth. She willed herself to look at him, only to find that he was staring determinedly ahead with an unreadable expression. I do too, she breathed, feeling a confusing mixture of relief and anxiety. What's going on over here? Came a new voice from behind them. What now? Sakura frowned and glared over her shoulder. But she sprang into a defensive stance when she realized who it was. Niji Hyuga with Tenten at his side. Sasuke seemed to decide the newcomers were worth his attention, so he also turned around, hands still in his pockets. Niji was the mysterious, elite prodigy of the year ahead of them, and shared many characteristics with Sasuke. He too carried an infamous bloodline, came off as extremely intimidating, was one of Konoha's most formidable genin, and was quite popular with the ladies. Niji had sharp, handsome features, stood a couple of inches taller than Sasuke, and had long, sleek brown hair fastened with a tie between his shoulder blades. His most noticeable trait, however, were his gleaming silver eyes which marked his possession of the all-seeing Byakugan. You're Sasuke Uchiha, Niji drawled, while crossing his arms and scanning Sasuke intensely. Sasuke smirked. I am, he replied, and lifting one of his dark eyebrows. And you are? Niji Hyuga. I was hoping I'd run into you at some point, Uchiha, he said, also smirking. The air was thick with tension as the two famous rookies squared each other off. Sakura felt yet another mixture of feelings, this time relief and annoyance because her opportunity to finally talk to Sasuke alone had been cast aside for this heated staring match. Tenten approached her then. Boys, huh? She said while rolling her chestnut brown eyes, and standing at Sakura's side to watch the standoff. Sakura chuckled. I know, she huffed. It was quite nice to see Tenten, the tall, level-headed brunette from Rock Lee and Niji's team. She was wearing a sleeveless, pink shirt and her hair tied up in two buns. Tenten giggled. Besides all this, I must say. Your teammate sure is easy on the eyes, she said, nodding approvingly. I could say the same about yours, Sakura answered with a sly grin. She shot a glance at Tenten to find that her face was now flaming red. Yeah, it's a goddamn nightmare, she groaned, but her smile never faltered. I'm Tenten, by the way. It's great to meet you. She stuck out her hand and Sakura stared at it dumbly. Tenten didn't know who she was? Well, that was an unexpected surprise. Sakura felt like she knew this girl inside and out, after the years they'd spent fighting on missions, drunk in bars, and naked in bathhouses together. It was pretty unnerving that all of those memories were completely gone. Sakura, she answered awkwardly and giving Tenten's hand a firm shake. Niji. Tenten. Yet another new voice cried out. We must hurry to our gate. The group of rookies spun back around to find none other than Rock Lee sprinting over in his trademark, green jumpsuit. Did you hear me? Sakura-san. Lee skidded to a halt when he was immediately before Sakura with a wild grin plastered on his face, beady eyes glistening. I didn't realize my beautiful cherry blossom was here. A stunned silence fell over the group. You're what? Sasuke asked, his eyebrows raised. Lee whirled around to face Sasuke. Oh. My sincerest apologies. You must be Sakura-san's teammate. My name is Rock Lee. I am Sakura-san's personal training partner and I promise to protect her with my life. Then he shot Sasuke what he probably presumed was a winning smile and a double thumbs up. Sasuke looked positively appalled, but before he could say anything, Naruto, Kiba, and the others joined in on the conversation. Who's this punk with the bushy eyebrows? Naruto growled and pushing his way into the middle of the crowd. Lee didn't seem to appreciate Naruto's remark. I just happen to be an embodiment of youthful energy, None of you stand a chance against me. And, naturally, both Naruto and Kiba didn't respond well to that claim. An explosive exchange of insults ensued between the three, while Tenten, Shino, and Hinata made every attempt to break it up. Niji put his head in his hands and Sasuke approached Sakura. "Come on," he hissed when he was within earshot, leading her away from the group. Sakura obliged without hesitation. The clearing wasn't as crowded now that most exam participants had made it to their designated gates. But even when they were quite far from the throng, Sasuke didn't stop. It seemed he was leading them to the foresty patch on the opposite side of the clearing. Sakura's throat clenched. This was it. This was when she told Sasuke about his clan. And she had no idea how she was going to go about it. "It's no surprise you have stalkers," Sasuke commented as they neared the trees. "Huh?" Sakura glanced up at him only to receive a disbelieving glare. "Why are you training with a creep like that?" Sasuke questioned calmly, though there was underlying resentment in his tone. Sakura felt defensive. Sure, Lee was odd, especially at this age, but he was a good person and a skilled ninja. Also, Sakura's emotions were out of whack and she desperately needed somewhere to channel them. "Lee is an excellent training partner," she snapped. "He might not look strong, and he might be a bit forward, but he's talented. And his heart is in the right place." Sasuke's eyes flashed dangerously. "Right," he seethed. Sakura frowned. "So is that all you want to talk to me about then? My choice of training partners?" "No," he answered as they arrived in the forest. Sasuke paused and glanced over his shoulder before grabbing Sakura's arm and pulling her behind a tree so that they were shielded from view. "That's not it. You have something to tell me too, right?" Sakura really couldn't have asked for a more private location. Her back was now pressed against a tree trunk, and besides Sasuke, no other ninjas were within detectable range, except for the crowd hovering around the arena. Sakura would be an idiot not to bring up his clan now. Especially because as soon as they entered that arena, their chances of having a private moment like this was very slim. She stared up at his face, because she had nowhere else to look really, and noted how he was watching her expectantly. "You first," she said quickly in hope that she could buy herself just a little more time. Sasuke shrugged. "All right," he said, before lowering his gaze to the ground. And then, he fell silent. Sakura watched him, perplexed. What did he want to tell her, anyways? Because whatever it was, it appeared to be eating him up. His eyebrows were furrowed and he wasn't looking anywhere near her. Sakura opened her mouth to prompt him to talk, but he beat her to it. "Look," he said, and nodding towards the ground. But Sakura didn't even have to look to realize what this was about. A familiar chirping and hum of electricity signaled that Sasuke's eyes weren't fixed on the ground at all, but on his hand. Sakura followed his stare to his open palm, which was supporting a tiny, electric blue Chidori. Sakura's body seized instinctively. After all the times his future self had nearly murdered her with this very technique, seeing him wield it again was terribly unnerving. In spite of this, she was so impressed. Sasuke had only been training with Kakashi for about 2 weeks and he managed to draw out his affinity for lightning-type techniques? Wow, she breathed. Sasuke looked up at her, his face illuminated by the pale, blue light. "It uses up a lot of chakra, so I'll save it for desperate circumstances. It's not complete either, but after the exams, Kakashi said he'd help me perfect it." The Chidori fizzled away and their surroundings darkened again. "I've already showed Naruto. I thought you should both know about this attack in our team's arsenal." Sakura nodded, met his gaze and found that his dark eyes were shimmering with pride. It might have been a trick of the shadows, but his lips were quirked into a small, reserved smile. "He's so happy." "So what did you want to tell me?" he asked seriously. Shit. She couldn't do it. Not now. Sakura intertwined her fingers and felt her lips tremble. She started, and averting her stare. "I missed you yesterday," she lied in the direction of her feet. Sasuke didn't say anything for a moment. And Sakura prayed that he would interpret her behavior as shyness and not deception. But then he said "did you," in the flattest, most disbelieving tone she'd ever heard. Sakura opened her mouth to argue, but then Sasuke placed his hand on her chin and tilted it up so that she was forced to look directly at his face. "Bullshit," he growled, his dark eyes narrowing. Sakura's mouth grew very dry as he scanned her face and the depths of her soul. What is this really about? She was cornered. There was no way out. But she wasn't ready. He didn't realize what he was asking of her. This information could not only ruin his day, but ruin his performance in the exams. He might even quit the exams, depending on how he took the news. And Sakura couldn't afford to have her entire team thrown out now, not when her promotion was on the line, when the fate of the ninja world was on the line. "Guys." A familiar voice sounded through forest, and seconds later, Naruto's head popped around the tree trunk. "Where have you? What are you doing?" He yelled with disgust, probably when he took notice of their proximity against the tree. Sakura released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She was saved. For now. Sasuke pulled his hand away from Sakura's face and immediately shoved it in his pocket. "I showed it to her," he said, and shooting a glare at his blonde teammate. But he would soon regret saying anything at all, because then Naruto's eyes nearly bulged out of their sockets and he burst out laughing. "You showed what to her? You showed IT to her?" Naruto choked out while trying and failing to stifle his laughing with his hands. Sakura had to use every ounce of her willpower to stop herself from laughing too. She was feeling rather euphoric about Naruto's timely interruption. And now that Naruto was here, telling Sasuke about the letter was totally out of the question. She would have to save it for a better time, perhaps once the second exam was over. Sasuke didn't seem terribly amused by Naruto's comment. "Idiot," he groaned and rolling his eyes. "Let's go to our gate." "Hey! That's what I was trying to get you guys to do," Naruto shouted as the three of them emerged from the trees. "How are we going to kick everybody's ass if we get disqualified, huh? Let's go." Naruto spun on his heel and made for the clearing, but not before Sasuke stuck out his foot and tripped him, causing Naruto to stumble around aimlessly while Sasuke sprinted ahead. "Bastard!" Naruto cried before tearing after him. Sakura smiled at the familiarity of the scene before her. "Here we go." Chapter 22 Reconnected. Konoha's 44th training ground, more commonly referred to as the Forest of Death, was an enormous arena filled with looming forests, streams, and mossy terrain, and was contained by a tall chain-link fence. Along the fence was a series of gates, one for each participating team, which served as one-way tickets into the second exam. Once you passed through the gate there was no getting out, unless you made it to the tower in the middle of the arena with 2 scrolls, 1 heaven scroll and 1 earth scroll. Team 7 was entering the exam with a heaven scroll, which meant that in order to pass the exam, they needed to steal an earth scroll from another team and make it to the tower in one piece. The teams were likely to keep their scrolls close on their persons, so the most feasible way to steal them was by force, either to snatch it from an opponent in close combat or to pummel them until they forfeited or died. "I'll hold it," Sasuke said under his breath when they were handed a scroll while standing by their designated gate. Sakura and Naruto agreed, reluctantly, on Naruto's part, and Sasuke slipped it into his weapon holster. Then a final message sounded over the intercom system, followed by a blaring siren indicating the start of the exam. Sakura's heart pounded in her chest as the gate opened with a series of accelerating clicks, and as soon as they had enough space to fit through, Team 7 raced into the arena without a backwards glance. Sheer adrenaline took hold then. Sakura's legs pumped her through the trees at full speed. Her surroundings were a huge blur of green and brown, and the further they pushed on, the darker the blur became. Sakura needed to ensure that her team passed with flying colors if she was going to secure that hospital promotion. Team 7 didn't need to put on a show, they simply had to be strategic and efficient. It was in the third exam, during the one-on-one matches, that she'd focus on making an impression for the spectators. But for now, they just needed to find an earth scroll and get the hell out of this forest. Naruto was currently in the lead, his orange jacket flapping behind him. He was running determinedly forwards, but after about 2 minutes of aimless sprinting, Sakura, who was close on his tail, started wondering where exactly he was leading them. She wasn't feeling tired yet, but she knew a thing or two about energy conservation and wasn't keen to expend so much of it if they didn't have to. Sakura opened her mouth to call out to her teammate, but then, out of nowhere, he skidded to a halt. This triggered a chain of events. Sakura, who hadn't been far behind Naruto, slammed into his back, and Sasuke, who hadn't been far behind Sakura, slammed into her back. Though Sakura had been working on her physique over the last few months, Sasuke was still quite a bit bigger and quite a bit heavier than she was, so the impact caused her to slam into Naruto again, which sent him flying face first into the dirt with a loud "Ouf." Sakura too would have toppled forward if Sasuke hadn't caught her by the fabric at her back. "Hey!" Naruto spluttered through a mouthful of dirt. "Watch where you're going." "Watch where I'm going." Sakura shot back as she regained balance. "Why did you stop like that?" She pulled out a knife and whirled around. "Did he spot an enemy?" I've gotta take a leak," Naruto whined as he sprang to his feet and hopped around with his legs squeezed together. "Are you serious?" Sasuke groaned, rubbing his temples. "Well, hurry up. We can't stand around here." Yeah, Naruto said and rolling his eyes. He hobbled to a nearby bush and unzipped his pants. Sakura covered her face with her hands. "Naruto, please," she sighed. "Not in front of." But then a thought occurred to her. This scene felt awfully familiar. And if her memory served her correctly, if they let Naruto wander off on his own in this very spot. "Stay here," she whispered to her teammates as she crept past Naruto and into the thick brush. Naruto shrugged and proceeded to unzip his pants as originally planned. "What?" Sasuke asked, looking utterly perplexed by her sudden change in demeanor. "Cover me," she hissed, and creeping forwards, her kunai poised. Yes, this spot looked familiar indeed. This was the very place where Naruto was ambushed when they took the exams in her previous life. By a ninja from the hidden rain village. She continued her stealthy trek, pushing branches aside and treading softly on the leaves and twigs beneath her feet. If the rain ninja was planning to attack like last time, he had to be right around here somewhere. Then something gripped her ankle. Sakura gasped and glanced down to find a hand emerging directly from the ground, its fingers tightly curled around the base of her leg. Sakura cursed that she had totally forgotten about these rain ninjas' unusual earth release abilities. They were able to pass through and hide within solid objects, including the ground, trees, and rocks, without disrupting the surrounding area. Pairing this technique with masking his chakra signature could make a hiding ninja nearly impossible to find. And impossible to anticipate an attack from. Sakura pumped chakra to her foot in attempt to blast the hand off her, but then a kunai pierced clean through the wrist with a spurt of blood, forcing the hand to let her go. Sasuke leaped down from the tree he'd been watching from and pulled out another kunai as Naruto barreled through the trees while zipping up his pants. "Hey! What's going on?" he yelled when he reached his teammates. The rain ninja made his appearance by fully emerging from the ground, snarling and cradling his injured arm. He looked exactly how Sakura remembered him, in a pale, yellow jumpsuit with stitching down the middle, a forehead protector that covered his entire head, a white sash wrapped around his face with slits for eye holes, and a rebreather mask. Naruto took a swing at the rain ninja, but he rolled out of reach just in time, clutching his bleeding wrist. "Who the hell are you?" Naruto growled fiercely while coiling his body to strike again. Sasuke and Sakura stood on either side of their teammate, withdrawing fistfuls of weapons in preparation for a fight. But none came. The rain ninja soundlessly sprang into the trees and disappeared from view, apparently retreating. Smart guy, Sakura thought. He wouldn't stand against the three of us in close quarters combat, especially now that he's injured. Memories were flooding back to her now. Team 7 had fought this very ninja and his team at the end of the second exam in her previous life. These opponents were notorious for using clones and long-range genjutsu to wear their enemies down before moving in to pick them off. It was a rather smart strategy to use, particularly because their hand-to-hand combat skills frankly sucked. The trick to defeating ninjas like this was to lure them out into the open and attack before they had time to summon clones or cast a genjutsu in the first place. "Get back here!" Naruto yelled and moving to follow the rain ninja, but Sasuke stuck out an arm to stop Naruto from advancing. "He's alone," Sasuke said, using his Sharingan to scan the parameters. "There's no point following. He's probably just scouting out the area without a scroll on him." Naruto shoved Sasuke's arm aside. "Who cares?" he fumed. "That just means one of his teammates has it, and if we follow him, we can fight them for it now." Sakura sighed and ran a hand through her short, pink hair. She wasn't so sure engaging in battle at the very start of the exam was a smart idea. "Let's not pick a fight with every ninja we encounter, Naruto. We need to come up with a plan." She paused. "I say we get as far from the gate as possible, find the tower, and pick off teams with both scrolls before they make it inside." "The tower?" Sasuke repeated and shooting Sakura a disbelieving glare. "The exam just started. There's no point going there until we have the scrolls." Sakura gritted her teeth. "Well, what do you suggest?" "We find sources of food and water," Sasuke shot back, as if she was a lunatic for thinking otherwise. He had a point, but this wasn't Sakura's first time in the arena. She knew what strategies worked. "It would be more valuable to secure a spot near the tower," she protested. "Before other teams set up traps to ambush us, let's set up our own." Sasuke frowned. "We'll tire out before we get there. That's what I packed soldier pills for." Sakura glared at her stubborn teammate. If they could trap a team with an earth scroll near the exit, they could finish this exam before the day was over. She knew Team 7 was strong enough to finish the exam early, if only they maximized every second in this arena. "Hurry up. Let's get him while he's injured." Sasuke and Sakura exchanged a wide-eyed look. "Looks like Naruto made up his mind while we were arguing." Sakura glanced up just in time to glimpse her blonde teammate disappearing through the high branches in pursuit of the retreating rain ninja. "Well, I guess we're fighting now," Sasuke seethed before propelling himself up into the trees. "You've gotta be kidding me," Sakura groaned before following suit. Well, it seemed Sakura's strategy of planning an ambush near the tower would have to wait. Thankfully, when she and Sasuke caught up to Naruto, he was concealing himself high in the trees above the rain ninja rendezvous point. She perched herself onto the branch next to Naruto and gazed down at their soon-to-be opponents, who seemed oblivious to their presences so far. Good. Though she would have preferred heading towards the tower and avoiding combat just yet, Team 7 had a distinct advantage from their stealthy position high up in the trees. The rain ninjas' real bodies were in plain sight below them, so as long as they struck the ninjas before they had time to hide among clones, Team 7 had this in the bag. Sakura had no doubt that her team had the physical strength to win if they timed their attack just right. After all, this time around, Team 7 was a force to be reckoned with. Sasuke, given his infamous bloodline and abilities in both lightning and fire release techniques, was a powerhouse in his own right. And Naruto, although a little clumsy and impulsive at times, had the most stamina and brute strength of the trio. And both boys presumably had much better chakra control now that they had been training with Sakura and Hinata respectively. Sakura knew that she too was a worthy opponent despite her young body's shortcomings. Not only was she proficient in medical ninjutsu, but she was smarter, stronger, and more resourceful with her chakra than she was before. Hey, maybe Naruto's plan wasn't quite so bad after all. Considering how last time they were in the Forest of Death Team 7 had spent most of the exam running from enemies, it felt pretty good to be on the offensive. Sakura cast a meaningful look at her teammates. They exchanged a nod. And then they sprang off the branch, descending towards their unsuspecting opponents below. Excellent, Sakura thought as she hurled through the air, gripping the handles of 2 kunai between her fingers. The 3 rain ninjas looked identical from this angle, with their matching yellow jumpsuits, masks, and headgear. Naruto, who never made much of a fuss over using stealth, descended the fastest. Only when he was about 10 feet above the rain ninjas did they seem to clue in that they were being ambushed. Kagari. Mebi. One of the ninjas shouted to alert his teammates before they all started melting into the ground below them. Sakura cursed. They're getting away. She yelled. It was that damn earth release technique again. They were planning to hide their bodies in the solid earth and out of reach. Not if I can help it. Naruto growled and taking hold of one of the rain ninja's legs just before it vanished and yanking him out of the ground. Ah! The ninja cried, as Naruto swung him through the air and into a nearby tree with a crash. The truck snapped clean in two and the ninja disappeared into the rubble, with Naruto close on his tail. The other two rain ninjas would be much harder to catch. They were nearly entirely submerged into the ground by the time Sasuke and Sakura landed. The ground, Sakura! Sasuke called, but Sakura was already charging up her hands with chakra. She slammed her gloved fists into the ground, creating a miniature earthquake and uprooting chunks of earth in the process. The disturbance created enough of a distraction for Sasuke to lodge several shuriken in their exposed body parts. One of the ninjas managed to get away, albeit injured. But the other, who had several weapons embedded in his back, wasn't so lucky. He'd frozen with shock when he was hit, and in that moment, Sasuke managed to get a hold of his jumpsuit collar and wind up to deliver the finishing blow. But then Naruto reappeared and slammed his palm into the ninja's chest, sending him down, back first, into the hard earth. The ninja let out a cry of pain when the shuriken were pushed deeper into his flesh on impact. Sakura took a moment to observe the scene. Naruto had used his palm to take out an enemy. His palm. Not a shadow clone, not a recklessly powerful punch, but a deliberate, calculated strike right to a vital point on his enemy's body. So he has been working on the gentle fist technique with Hinata after all, Sakura thought with a smirk. Surely this new skill would change the nature of his fighting for the better. And also, improve his confidence. Naruto looked positively thrilled that the blow had been so effective. Not only had he taken out one enemy, but two of them, in less than a minute. Naruto, where is the other guy? Sakura asked when it dawned on her that the first ninja Naruto attacked was nowhere in sight. Unconscious, he replied and looking quite pleased with himself. His mask knocked off when I slammed him into the tree and he didn't wake up after that. Nice, Sasuke said, nodding with approval, which only made Naruto glow with pride even more. Go search him for the scroll. I'll search this guy, he said, beckoning towards the newly fallen victim on the ground. Sakura, cover us in case the third one attacks. Got it. She answered as Naruto disappeared into the brush once again and Sasuke lowered himself over the other enemy, who was cowering in pain. The third guy could be anywhere now on a rock, a tree, the ground thanks to his earth release technique. But he was sustaining injuries from Sasuke's weapons, putting the ninja at a huge disadvantage. He'd be an idiot to attack us from a close range, Sakura thought, carefully scanning the area for any sign of movement. He's outnumbered. Unless he uses clones. Right on cue, Sakura heard a gentle rustling from somewhere behind her. She peered over her shoulder just in time to catch sight of two dark, gruesome bodies apparently growing right out of a tree trunk. Sakura's breath caught in her throat as she whirled around, drawing weapons and preparing to strike the eerie intruders. But upon careful examination, Sakura realized that these weren't normal clones. That was when a fiery projectile blasted a hole in one of the body's arms. Sakura turned to find that Sasuke was now on his feet with his eyes trained on the clones. Watch out! He yelled and making the hand seals to send more fireballs in their direction. Hold on! She called back and raising a warning hand. Don't attack them. It'll just... But Sakura needn't say anything more because that was when the clone Sasuke had just attacked started contorting. Out of the gaping hole in its shoulder, a new growth of dark, muddy flesh emerged. He's multiplying, Sasuke finally noticed, his nose twitching with disgust as the growth sprouted arms and detached itself from the original body in a slimy, dripping mess. Yeah, Sakura said, balling her fists with frustration. This is called missed servant technique. Those clones are dead weights that multiply each time we attack them. There's no use fighting or we'll just tire out. Damn it, Sasuke cursed. And the guy I searched didn't have the scroll on him. No scroll here either. Naruto's voice rang out before he emerged from the bushes. What the hell are those? He added when he caught sight of the disfigured mud clones and crouching into a defensive position. Don't touch them, Sakura scolded as the clones started advancing in a zombie-like stupor. They'll just keep dividing. The real body isn't here. Well, what are we supposed to do? Just let them attack us? Naruto whined and sizing up the clones. For now, yes, Sasuke decided, which earned him surprised looks from both of his teammates. Naruto, entertain them. Sakura, follow me. Sakura didn't have a chance to question his thinking because then Sasuke disappeared into the forest behind them. What? She heard Naruto roar as she followed suit, trusting that Sasuke had some sort of plan. She met him high in the trees, overlooking the battle, where Naruto was fending off the growing army of mud clones with several of his own doppelgangers. Don't move, he hissed under his breath when Sakura landed. His Sharingan were activated and scanning the area determinately. Can he see the missing ninja controlling the clones? There, he breathed a short while later. The tree at 2 o'clock. Sakura followed her teammate's gaze to the tree he was indicating. The rain ninja was nowhere in sight. But Sasuke's eyes must have detected his chakra signature near or within that tree. I'll lure him out. Destroy the tree. And with that, Sasuke sprang down to join Naruto and his shadow clones. Finally. It's about time you helped me out, bastard. She heard Naruto groan from below. As instructed, Sakura crept along the outskirts of the battle, carefully masking herself in the branches. Although Sasuke appeared to be joining Naruto in the fight, he was inching towards the tree he'd pointed out to Sakura. Ah, I see what he's doing. Sasuke was trying to look like he had his guard down in hope that he could draw the opponent out into the open. And it worked. Shortly after Sasuke landed, Sakura spied a hand gripping a kunai emerge near the base of the tree trunk. Bingo! The hand pulled back, preparing to lodge the knife between Sasuke's shoulder blades, but that was when Sakura enacted her part of the plan. Shanaru! She launched herself at the trunk, feet first, and shattered it to pieces on impact, sending the upper portion of the tree plummeting into the forest. The rain ninja dropped the kunai and froze just long enough for Sasuke to spin around and pull him out of the hunk of wood in a shower of splinters. Sasuke gripped the rain ninja by the throat and thrust him against a neighboring tree trunk. The scroll. Take it. The ninja choked through his rebreather mask. Sasuke cast Sakura a meaningful look and she nodded, approaching the ninja to take his scroll away while Sasuke pinned him down firmly. But as she neared the incapacitated enemy, something strange happened. Instead of scanning his body for the scroll, she found herself visualizing charging her fists with all the chakra she could muster and slamming them straight into his chest. It was like she had too much chakra all of a sudden and that it needed to be released. And the very idea of doing so, of unleashing the full extent of her power, felt intoxicating. But, why? Was this just the post-battle rush talking? Was this an instinct to declare the fight over once and for all? But the fight was over. The last standing rain ninja was now totally helpless and surrounded, and had even surrendered his team's scroll. This battle was as good as won. So what was going on? Why was she feeling this euphoric, boiling urge to harm this man for no good reason? She was a healer, for goodness sake. An urge like this was totally illogical and counterproductive. Sakura, Sasuke's voice cut through her thoughts. Sakura's head snapped up to find that Sasuke was watching her with his eyebrows furrowed, clearly having detected that something was off. Take the scroll, he repeated. Right, she said, and ignoring the pull of her uncharacteristically violent desires. She searched the ninja's weapon pouch and jumpsuit and found the scroll in a concealed zippered pocket in the fabric's lining. The clone freaks are gone. Naruto trumpeted as he raced over to join his teammates, punching a celebratory fist into the air. Good job, team. Yeah, Sasuke agreed once Sakura had the scroll in her grasp. He released the rain ninja, who collapsed to the ground in a heap. Sasuke turned his attention to their defeated enemy. Go tend to your teammates, he ordered. They're alive but need care. Yes. The ninja responded before scrambling to his feet and retreating through trees. Huh. You're so soft, Naruto laughed and clapping Sasuke on the back. Shut up, Sasuke growled before turning to Sakura. So, which scroll is it? She pursed her lips. Heaven, Sakura answered quietly before tucking the scroll into her weapon holster. Crap, Naruto grumbled. Well, that's bad luck. Now we've got two of them. Sakura opened her mouth to explain how possessing an extra heaven scroll was still handy for bargaining purposes, but that was when she heard a discernible rustling in the branches above. All three of their heads snapped up. Let's get out of here, Sasuke hissed, his eyes narrowed. Wordlessly, Team 7 turned away and booked it towards the shelter of the forest. Damn, how didn't I think of this before? Sakura thought, cursing her stupidity. She knew battling so near the start of the exam was unwise for energy conservation purposes, but she hadn't thought of the unwanted attention it might draw. God knows how many spectators had been watching their fight from the shadows. And now that Team 7 was quite obviously victorious in the fight, they'd just made themselves targets of any team in need of scrolls. Which, at this point in the exam, was everybody. Ack! Naruto suddenly cried and stumbling face first into the mossy ground. Naruto! Sakura gasped and skidding to a halt. She spun around to inspect her fallen teammate. What happened? Got hit. He spluttered while lifting his head and wincing. Sakura's trained eye scanned her teammate for injuries. It didn't take long to spot the needles protruding from his arms and back. Senbon? But that was all Sakura had time to process of the situation before Sasuke yelled get down. And threw himself flat onto her back, knocking the breath out of her and pressing her firmly to the ground beside Naruto. A new barrage of Senbon word passed. Shit. Looks like we're being pursued. Regardless of how strong this new enemy was, they'd all depleted enough chakra against the rain ninjas to put them at a disadvantage in a fresh battle. Right now, more than anything, they needed to take shelter to hide and recover before even thinking of engaging in a fight with anyone else. And not only was she low on chakra, but Sakura was starting to feel lightheaded. Which was terribly inconvenient, given her position sandwiched to the ground in the middle of an ambush that they desperately needed to get away from, somehow. Sasuke's body clenched against hers at several points during the barrage. You hit? Sakura choked out. She twisted her face to the side to spit out a mouthful of dirt, her cheek scraping against the ground. It was almost impossible to move with all of Sasuke's weight on her back. Ugh, he groaned, his breath shaky, which she took as an affirmative answer. But then he stirred, peering over his shoulder for any sign of another immediate attack. He seemed to determine the coast was clear, because then he sprang onto all fours, grabbed Naruto's arm and Sakura's waist, and dragged them behind the tree to their left. Okay, Naruto? Sasuke asked as they all clambered to their feet, while pulling a needle out of his arm with a dribble of blood. Yeah, Naruto grumbled, rubbing the back of his neck and glancing to the spot they'd just been laying. Now what? I'll create a diversion, Sasuke said hurriedly, his eyes darting back and forth between his teammates. You guys start running. Naruto opened his mouth to protest, but another shower of needles rushed past them, striking the earth and nearby trees. Go! Sasuke hissed, crouching low against the tree and nodding towards the forest ahead of them. Oh, okay. Naruto answered, and taking hold of Sakura's hand. Let's go, Sakura-chan. He cried and pulling her forward. But Sakura stumbled and collapsed to her knees. Because that was when she felt a pulse rocketing up her spine and imploding in her skull. She let out a breathless scream and grabbed her head as the world started spinning in and out of focus. Sakura-chan? Another pulse and everything went black. A dim light appeared in the periphery when Sakura opened her eyes. Everything was so frustratingly fuzzy and dark that she couldn't discern any of the shapes in her surroundings. Sakura. Are you with me? Her chest tightened. That voice. Or are you there? Sakura blinked rapidly when she realized that she was being cradled in someone's arms. There was a face hovering directly over her and a hand pressed to her neck, searching for a pulse. Sakura. Can you answer me? Tsunade-sama. Sakura-chan. Sakura's eyes snapped open to a world that was so blindingly bright that she quickly squeezed them shut again. The sound of rushing water and chirping crickets became audible as a cool waterside breeze tickled her skin. Sakura-chan, are you awake? She braved to open her eyes once more, and this time, the light wasn't quite as harsh. She appeared to be at a campsite with her back propped up against a tree trunk, facing a blaring orange sunset and a small stream encased by trees. She met the bright blue eyes of her dearest friend, who had an expression so expectant that it rivaled that of a begging dog. Naruto? She croaked as she started to regain her bearings. Right, this was the forest of death. She placed a shaky hand on her neck where she'd apparently dreamed someone was checking her pulse. Someone whose voice sounded an awful lot like Tsunade's. Weird. You are awake. Naruto beamed and squeezing her arm affectionately. Geez, when you smashed your head on that rock, you went out cold. I carried you all the way over here and couldn't get you to wake up at all. Ah, that's right. They were being pursued. Sakura's mind was flooded with questions. What happened to the enemies? What rock? Where's Sasuke? She asked as her heart started hammering in her chest. That was when something soft and wet hit her in the face with a firm splat. Ugh. What? Sakura gasped and scrambling to pry the object off, only to find it was a soaked cloth. Nice catch, said a familiar voice. Sakura sighed with relief as her other teammate came into view, gripping 3 dead rabbits by the bases of their ears. What happened? Where are we? Put that on your head, Sasuke said sharply and ignoring her questions. Unless you're well enough to heal yourself. Oh. Right, she answered unsurely and placing the wet cloth to her head where, now that she focused on it, it was actually throbbing like hell. You fell down and slammed your head on a rock while we were escaping, Naruto explained and easing onto the ground in front of her. So I carried you away as fast as I could and found shelter. Then Sasuke caught up with us. How did you? Sakura started, turning to Sasuke, but he interrupted. I scattered corrosive exploding tags, he said while arranging logs and stones into a fire pit. Then I set the place on fire and left. They stopped following after that, so I think I got them. Sakura nodded, relieved by his quick thinking. Then we found this place, Naruto continued. And we've already set up traps and stuff, so we'll probably stay the night. Wow, how long was I out for? Sakura asked, raising her eyebrows. It all felt like a 3-second blur. Few hours, Naruto answered with a shrug and Sakura gaped at him. You didn't miss much once we got away. See, my wounds are already healed, he added while rolling up the sleeves of his jacket to expose his entirely scar-free arms. My back's better too. Sakura smiled. That's great. Under normal circumstances, she would ask to inspect his back, but she knew the 9-tailed fox's chakra could patch up moderate injuries like Senbon punctures in no time at all. And you, Sasuke? She asked in the direction of her other teammate, who had just stood up with empty water canteens in hand. I'm fine, he deadpanned and turning towards the stream. Show me then, Sakura called back. Though Sasuke had quite an advanced skill set, there was nothing particularly special about his body to speed up its healing processes. He suffered from physical wounds as badly as any other human being did, but he was determinedly stubborn to hide this fact. Naruto laughed and rose to his feet. Just let her heal you. I'll get the water. And then he snatched the canteens out of Sasuke's hands and proceeded towards the stream. You'll be a burden to our team if you're injured, he added over his shoulder in a mocking tone, and Sakura had to suppress a chuckle at hearing one of Sasuke's signature lines coming from the goofy blonde. Sasuke didn't move from his spot by the fire pit for a moment. Then he caught Sakura's victorious smirk and he narrowed his eyes. Fine, he snapped. But only if you fix your head first. Sakura obliged and proceeded to pump soothing medical chakra in through her temples until the throbbing and bruises had faded while Sasuke continued preparing the logs for a fire. He explained that they shouldn't cook the rabbits until the morning when they were ready to move, lest they draw in enemies by the fire's light and scent while they slept. So what happened back there? Sasuke asked shortly after as he settled himself down next to Sakura and pulled off his shirt, all while staring determinedly ahead. I don't know, Sakura answered honestly while surveying his bare skin for injuries, and trying, as hard as she possibly could, to focus on her medical duty and not on how unfairly attractive her teammate looked right now. The sun had set a little further in a blend of oranges and pinks, casting long shadows on their campsite, and highlighting the definition in Sasuke's well-conditioned arms and torso. It's hard to explain. Just try, he prompted. Sakura sighed as she removed her black gloves, shoved them in her medical pouch, and placed her hands on his arm, which bore 3 Senbon puncture wounds. She absent-mindedly wondered, as she often did, how someone who breathed fire could feel so cold. Something's happening to me but I don't know what, she explained quietly and glancing around to find that Naruto was still nowhere in sight. For Sakura, there was an inherent feeling of vulnerability that came with disclosing personal information. Particularly when the one she was disclosing information to tended to read her better than she was comfortable with. He raised his eyebrows, encouraging her to continue, just as the first hole in his arm closed. When you were holding that rain ninja against the tree, I wanted to finish him off, she mumbled. For some reason, it felt like she was revealing something embarrassing. Sasuke took pause. That's it? He asked slowly. That's what you're trained to do. I know that. But, why did you let him get away so easily, huh? If we're trained to finish our enemies off? She asked, her voice raising slightly as she shifted their position so she could work on his back. Thankfully, it was in much better shape than it could have been. There weren't any punctures too close to his spine, which spared him of central nervous system damage. There were only 2 holes near his right shoulder blade and another in his lower back. That enemy must be a horrible shot for not hitting any vital parts on either of her teammates. Either that or he wasn't intending to hurt them in the first place. Sasuke spoke then, so quietly that his voice was barely audible. I hate killing, he said. His face wasn't visible from Sakura's position behind him, but she noticed the muscles in his back tense briefly. But enough to signal that what he'd just revealed to her was causing him discomfort. Unless I have to, he added, shaking his head slightly. And don't you dare tell Naruto. Sakura lowered her hands. Now this was news to her. Sasuke Uchiha, the world-renowned, deadly villain, hated killing. She wanted to laugh and cry all at once. But of course he hated killing. Regardless of whether Itachi killed them of his own free will or on orders, he'd forced Sasuke to witness more death than most ninjas would see in a lifetime when he was only child, and not just any deaths, but the deaths of his family members. Did this have anything to do with the sleeping pills he was taking? Did the ninja lifestyle take a greater toll on him than he let on? Before she knew quite what she was doing, Sakura wrapped her arms around her teammate's shoulders and pressed herself against his back. She'd apparently caught Sasuke off guard because he nearly fell forward and instinctively grabbed onto her arms. You're supposed to be healing me, he grumbled. This is part of your treatment, she answered, smiling against the base of his neck. She could practically feel Sasuke roll his eyes at her comment. He was silent for a moment. And then he said, so, what else happened before you fainted? In an obvious attempt to change the subject, which she couldn't really blame him for. But Sakura did regrettably notice how quickly his heart was beating against her forearms and how he hadn't let go of him yet. That certainly wasn't doing her own heart rate any good. I don't know, she admitted, and shifting to rest her chin on her arm, parallel with his shoulder. I got really dizzy. And I don't remember anything after that. Sakura opted to leave out the part about hearing Tsunade's voice. It might be a little hard to explain and she still wasn't sure if she'd dreamed it. TCH, Sasuke said, shaking his head again. You worry too much. What? She snapped, temper flaring slightly. But, to her surprise, he flicked her forehead. She jumped and pulled back slightly. Think, Sakura, he said, and finally turning to meet her gaze from only a few inches away. Sakura watched him blankly, noting the rims around his pupils, the contours of his lips, and a fading blood smear on his cheek. What was he saying? Why was he looking at her like that? He jabbed her forehead again with 2 fingers, right between her furrowed eyebrows. Is he referencing my forehead? But what does it? Oh. And then it clicked. You mean, she breathed and raising her own hand to her face. The strength of 100 seal. Could the reason for her fainting spell have to do with her proximity to unlocking it? It was feasible and could explain her inexplicable urge to unleash her powers on an undeserving enemy. Her body might have known that she was only a few punches away from tapping into that enormous reserve of power. But what about the voice she had heard? That part just didn't add up. A loud cry cut through her musings. Guys! Come here! Sakura sprang to her feet at the sound of her teammate's voice and Sasuke followed suit. Keep it down, Naruto. Sasuke called towards the stream, his angry tone drastically quieter than the blonde's. I'm serious. Hurry! Sasuke and Sakura exchanged a wide-eyed look before they raced in the direction of their teammate's voice, Sasuke pulling his shirt over his not-quite-healed body in the process. They found Naruto sitting near the edge of the current and as white as a ghost. There's something in the water, he practically yelped and scurrying backwards to join his teammates. What? Sakura asked as Naruto threw his arms around her and peered back towards the water like a cowering animal. I don't know, he choked out. It grabbed me. Sakura froze. What the hell? Could it be that there were more Muddy Rain ninja clones around here? Alright then, Sasuke said and pulling out a weapon. Let's see what it is. He fired a kunai at the stream. A hand emerged from the water and caught the kunai effortlessly by its handle. All 3 of them jumped back with shock. The hand was ghostly white with tiny black marks twisting along its wrist. Chapter 23 The Breach. The ground trembled along the shoreline and Sakura felt Naruto's grip on her tighten. See? See? I told you something was in there. He cried, peering at the water over her shoulder with beady eyes. What is it? I don't know. Sakura answered as she attempted to regain balance on the reverberating ground beneath her feet. She was getting a bad feeling about this. And not only because Naruto was acting uncharacteristically frightened, but because there was a new energy swelling from the stream that made her blood run cold. Then, as quickly as it emerged, the ghostly hand retreated beneath the murky water's surface, pulling Sasuke's kunai in with it, leaving a barely discernible trace of ripples behind. But the ground was still shaking and the threat was far from over. We'll draw it out, Sasuke decided, and taking a brave step ahead of Naruto and Sakura, forming the hand seals for a fire release technique. Stop. Sakura snatched at her teammate's wrist, which earned her an irritated glare, but she sure as hell didn't care. There was something familiar about that hand. Unsettlingly so. We need to retreat, she hissed, and giving Sasuke's wrist a sharp tug. But it was too late. Because that was when chakra erupted from the lake in a cyclone of water and wind. Sakura pumped her own chakra down her legs just in time to brace herself in place. Her arms shot up to cut the shower of dirt and water droplets, made razor sharp from the blast. Naruto and Sasuke were thrown backwards several feet before they managed to plant themselves down. Moments later, when the wind calmed, Team 7 had their weapons poised. Who's there? Naruto growled, regaining his usual spunk, though he didn't dare venture any closer to the stream. There was no response or trace of movement. Sakura exchanged a nervous glance with the boys, who looked as baffled as she felt. What's its next move? Two pale hands slapped down onto the rocky shoreline. Sakura's breath caught in her throat as Sasuke's hand shot out in front of her defensively and Naruto latched onto her shoulders again. Its fingers dug into the muddy earth, hoisting its pale body out of the water in a slow, jerky crawl, nearer and nearer to where Team 7 was huddled together. Now Sakura should have been utterly terrified by the mysterious person's nearing proximity, and perhaps even consider making a break for it, but she was fixated on something else. Those marks. There were ink-black marks twisting along the body's exposed forearms. They were splotchy, some spots darker than others. Then its face broke the surface. "Come no closer," Sasuke commanded, and firing a kunai into the ground, barely a centimeter ahead of the person's nearest hand. But it paid no notice, it didn't even flinch. Instead, its dark eyes locked on Sakura's and it inched forward in a sluggish stupor, its soaked body dragging along the ground. What kind of jutsu was this? The only attack Sakura had ever seen that remotely resembled this was Sasuke's curse seal. But it couldn't be. That was when the person, clinging to the ground like his life depended on it, opened his mouth and emitted a straggled gasp. Sakura half expected to see something inhuman protruding from its parted lips, like fangs or a snake-like tongue, but instead, she only noticed the blisters near the corners of his mouth. His breaths were growing louder, sharper, and between them he wheezed a hardly audible help. Sakura froze. This isn't the curse mark. There was no way. Not only had she spent years studying Orochimaru's devastating curse, but she'd witnessed Sasuke lose himself to it on several occasions. And there was no damn way someone with the mark activated could look so helpless, so lifeless, so defeated. Of what Sasuke had described all those years ago, the seal made him feel energized and indestructible. Immortal even. So if it wasn't a curse, what was wrong with this person? Upon closer inspection, Sakura realized that the person, who looked to be a few years older than them, was a leaf shinobi who she didn't recognize. He had dirty blonde hair, currently soaked and sticking to his neck and face over his forehead protector. His skin was sunken, bluish and shining with perspiration, the veins on his forehead were bulging and his hands trembling. Although his stare was heavy, his dark eyes were swimming with tears and shifting in and out of focus. This was no curse. Curiosity piqued, Sakura took a shaky step forward while keeping her kunai raised, just in case. "Sakura! What the hell are you doing?" Sasuke shouted, raising his arm again to block her while Naruto tightened his hold. "He'll attack you," Naruto added, and pulling her against him protectively. "No he won't," Sakura answered, her voice steadier than she anticipated. Her eyes were locked on the boy now, who was shaking uncontrollably. "This isn't an enemy. This is a sickness." Without giving her teammates a chance to protest, she shoved their arms away and approached the boy, whose massive disturbing chakra was slipping away at a rapid pace and who was gazing up at her desperately. "You are sick, aren't you?" she asked quietly. He closed his eyes and nodded while letting out a muffled sob. Sakura's heart clenched. Through her medically trained eye, was plain to see that the boy was dying. "All right," Sakura answered while pulling on her tight black gloves with a snap. "I'm going to examine you." "Are you crazy?" Naruto gasped and racing over to her side. "It could be a trap," said Sasuke as Sakura lowered herself over the boy and turned him so that he was lying on his back. She ignored both of her teammates and placed her glowing green hands on his chest. Taking a deep breath, she closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel his organs, the air passing through his airways, the electrical energy flowing through his spine, his heart pumping, his blood. His blood. There are under-oxygenated pockets of blood throughout his whole body. That's why his skin is discolored in certain spots. Her teammates stared at her blankly while she pulled her medical pouch off her waistband and unfastened the buckle. "Ever heard of a Black Death?" "A what?" Naruto asked, and lowering his knife slightly. "It's a famous plague," Sakura explained while rooting through the pouch. "I've read about it. There are no known cases of it in this part of the world though." Sasuke crouched down next to her, giving up protesting, and gazed at the boy, whose breathing was becoming more bated by the second. Is that what he has then? He asked Sakura without averting his eyes. Maybe, she said a little distractedly while pulling out a small vial. His symptoms resemble it, at least. So I'll treat it the same way. She unscrewed the cap and tipped it until a small white pill landed on her open palm. Swallow this, she instructed, and pushing the pill against his lips. If I'm right about your condition, you have a parasitic disease that's sucking the oxygen out of your blood. That pill is a chakra-infused anti-parasitic drug that will help your immune system fight them. She pressed her hands on his chest again. It can take a few minutes to kick in, so in the meantime, I'll use my chakra to get a head start on destroying them. I don't have the resources or chakra supply to fully heal you here, but I'll limit the parasite spread and get you talking. I want to find out how the hell you got a disease like this. Let's make this quick, Sasuke said, and peering over his shoulders. We should find a new place to set up camp, and it's getting dark. And we haven't eaten dinner yet, Naruto added seriously. We aren't eating the rabbits now, Sasuke snapped, and rolling his eyes. If we light a fire, it'll be a death sentence. We'll do it in the morning. What? I can't wait that long. Just have a snack or something. What snack? I don't see any snacks. Sakura tuned out the rest. She'd managed to locate and kill 14 parasites near his left lung, but she knew there were many others, maybe hundreds. He'd better start talking soon because I can't waste too much chakra on him. And Sasuke was right, the sun had just about set and it was getting dark. They needed to move. Then the boy moaned softly and opened his eyes. What? Sakura prompted, leaning her body closer to the boy's face. He made another noise, but Sakura couldn't hear it at all. Shut up, both of you, she hissed, rounding on Sasuke and Naruto. He's talking. They silenced immediately and moved in closer. The boy started before taking a loud, harsh gulp. It appeared painful for him to speak. The lymph nodes near his neck were extremely inflamed. Did it, he finished, and letting out a long trail of air. He did it? Sakura echoed, and moving her hands to the sides of his neck, sending a soothing pump of medical chakra through the area to calm the swelling. Who did what? Asked Naruto, and getting right up in the boy's face with an expectant stare. Boy licked his dry lips through trembling gasps. Eyes of a snake, he breathed. He did this. Sakura froze. Eyes of a snake? No, he can't mean. But her train of thought was interrupted when the boy snatched at her wrist, squeezing it tightly. Her stomach flipped as Sasuke pressed his kunai to the boy's throat, and Naruto took hold of the boy's wrist and motioned to yank him off. He told me, the boy choked out, staring directly into Sakura's eyes as tears spilled over his lower eyelids and streamed down his pale face. To find you. Her blood ran cold. Orochimaru? Sakura barely whispered, her throat constricting. The boy nodded in a single jerky motion. Release her, Sasuke snapped, and pressing the kunai down harder, drawing droplets of blood. The boy obliged, and Sakura pulled her hand back against her chest and rose to her feet, breathing hard, her knees wobbling. It was like her heart stopped. Like the world stopped. Orochimaru was here, in the exams. And he was after her. How could she have been so naive to think that having the Sound Village kicked out of the exams would keep Orochimaru at bay? He was a mastermind, a legend. Hell, now that she thought about it, hadn't Orochimaru entered the exam as a grass ninja in her previous life? Hadn't he disguised himself as the Sand Village's Kazekage during the third exam? She was a goddamn idiot. And now she just might wind up dead for it. But if she died, the time travel mission would be ruined. This new world she'd created would die along with her. Sakura clenched the front of her shirt absent-mindedly, her arms trembling, feeling unbearably lightheaded. What was Orochimaru playing at with this disease? Wasn't he after new hosts for his body? The infected ninja appeared relatively insignificant, but if Orochimaru was behind this encounter, surely it served a purpose. And why did he send this diseased man to her in the first place? Wasn't it Sasuke his eyes were on? And if Orochimaru really wanted to kill her, it didn't make sense for him to send a dying man. So perhaps he didn't want her dead, perhaps he wanted to test her somehow. Naturally, the fact that Orochimaru was targeting her for anything at all was unsettling in and of itself. Had he heard of her medical skills? Did he know about the time travel mission? She was honestly afraid to find out. But for now, there was no point speculating about it. They needed to get the hell out of this exam and as far away from Orochimaru as possible. Sakura reached down for her medical pack and made for their campsite. "Sakura-chan, where are you going?" Naruto called after her, also rising to his feet. "Are we just gonna leave this guy here?" "We're going to the tower," she deadpanned without turning back and while increasing her stride. It didn't matter if they packed their things up. Passing the exam was meaningless now. Setting up camp and fighting were futile. They needed to run. But before Sakura was halfway back to their campsite, Sasuke flash-stepped and blocked her path. He shoved her shoulder with an open palm, forcing her to step back and face him. "We don't have both scrolls." "We don't have energy," he said and scanning her face through narrowed eyes. "What just got into you?" Naruto raced after them. "We need sleep, Sakura-chan." "And food," he pleaded. "We'll go to the tower tomorrow when we have the scrolls." White-hot rage coursed through her and she smacked Sasuke's warning hand away. They didn't understand. This wasn't about them anymore. This wasn't about the exams. They had to get out. But God, was she ever dizzy. "I'm going to the tower," she heard herself shout. "And if both of you want to live, I suggest you follow me." She shoved past her teammates in a daze and channeled chakra to her legs. Sakura's teammates probably thought she was insane. But she didn't care. Before she could catch either of their reactions, she launched herself into the air and through the branches of a nearby tree. And then she was flying from branch to branch, while leaves and twigs smacked her face and scraped her bare arms and legs. She was so tired and weak and sluggish. But she had to keep going, even though her surroundings were getting blurry, unsteady. Shortly after, she sensed Sasuke and Naruto on her tail, drawing closer and closer, picking up speed. Or was she slowing down? Without any forewarning, the second pulse struck then. And it was like her skull was caving in under a sharp and all-consuming pain, completely disorientating her. Her knees buckled and the sole of her boot missed the next branch. She slipped out of the tree, free-falling through the air. And landed on a cold, concrete surface. The first thing she noticed was that the air was musty and heavy, unlike the crisp forest air she'd just been leaping through. She opened her eyes but everything was pitch black. Sakura detected a presence with a familiar chakra signature hovering over her and she blinked rapidly, trying to regain control over her dominant sense. And, gradually, light started pooling in through the corners of her vision, illuminating her soundings. "Sakura?" said a firm, familiar voice. "Tsunade-sama?" Sakura choked and twisting her head around. Her sight was becoming clearer. She could see a pair of stern amber eyes and a deep purple diamond framed by strands of blonde hair. There was no doubt about it, Tsunade was above her, gripping Sakura's arms. And then, to her surprise, Tsunade stood, releasing Sakura, and cursed loudly. "It's damaged!" she roared and pounding her fist against the concrete wall beside her with a loud crack. Sakura sat up and felt blood rush to her head. And dread pool in her stomach. Bookshelves and cabinets lined the dark walls. An empty syringe was splayed on the floor. Her body was larger, heavier, her breasts straining against the fabric of her tight, green combat vest, her hands bigger, her chakra more abundant. She knew exactly where she was. She was in a room in the basement of the Hokage Tower. The last room she saw before embarking on the time travel mission. She was in the future. Then Sakura processed Tsunade's words and glanced down at her hands to find that she was clutching a scroll. A scroll that, upon closer inspection, had a small rip along its edge. "How long were you there?" Tsunade asked, her tone dripping with frustration as she turned back to face her apprentice. Several months, Sakura stammered, her voice breaking. I'm taking the Chunin exams. Do you know how it was torn? Tsunade beckoned towards the time travel scroll Sakura was clutching. She stared down at it, baffled. I don't know. I left it at home, as I usually do. Tears prickled in the corners of her eyes. Someone must have broken into her bedroom and forged through the traps. There was no other explanation for how the scroll had become so unexpectedly battered. The ground shook violently then, tipping over shelves and nearly throwing Sakura back onto the hard ground. That's right. They were under attack. A war was starting. Tsunade offered Sakura a hand and gazed down at her expectantly. We have no choice but to fight Orochimaru. Come. Sakura took a shaky breath between sobs, not remembering quite when she started crying. And when she reached to grasp Tsunade's hand, her arm was shaking uncontrollably. It felt strangely exhausting to move. Can you stand on your own? Tsunade asked as she pulled Sakura to her feet, a trace of tenderness in her voice. I'm surprised you survived the trip back here without your seal unlocked. What? Sakura asked and testing out her legs, and, thankfully, she discovered that she could stand by herself. Tsunade let out a long sigh and stared straight into Sakura's eyes, her eyebrows furrowed. There was a specific reason I chose you for that mission, Sakura, she said slowly, and slipping a steadying arm around Sakura's shoulders. I knew you were close to unlocking your strength of 100 seal. The regenerative properties of that seal would protect your body through the hard journey across dimensions. And frankly, I'm surprised to see you here alive without it. Sakura's mouth dried. That explained why she'd been feeling so dizzy and weak recently. Her body and mind were hurling back and forth through time. And that dream when she'd heard Tsunade's voice earlier, that wasn't a dream. That was a real journey to the future. A real breach in the link. Am I? Sakura started, breathing heavily, her heart beating hard against her chest. Am I ever going back? Did I fail the mission? Tsunade released Sakura's shoulders and turned towards the door, and to Sakura's relief, she was feeling a bit steadier now. This body was far sturdier than her body in the other world, despite the toll it had taken from the scroll, and had a larger reserve of chakra. I don't know, Tsunade answered over her shoulder while pulling the door open. But right now, this is the world that exists. This is the battle you must fight. Just pretend the time travel mission never happened. And then she departed with a blast of chakra, leaving Sakura alone in the dark room with the broken scroll in hand. In a trance, her legs carried her up the steps while she clutched the scroll, refusing to believe that the other world no longer existed. She could run just fine, except that the tower was reverberating continuously now, and the sounds of distant explosions were drawing closer and closer. She used the narrow walls lining the staircase to support her as she ventured up to the ground level. She arrived at the grand front doors and threw them open to find her home in turmoil. There was fire and rubble and smoke and a giant snake crashing through Konoha's protective stone walls. This can't be happening. This must be a nightmare. Tsunade had apparently called for Konoha's troops to assemble, but without the time to prepare a proper formation, a series of uncoordinated small-scale matches between leaf and sound ninjas were taking place throughout the village, on rooftops, in the streets, in parks, in buildings. Most ninjas were forming protective circles around the defenseless crowds of civilians. That's all because of me, Sakura thought, and staring out at the upheaval. Tsunade thought I would succeed. She thought I'd keep the scroll safe for a few years and stop this war. She wanted to vomit. But an even more powerful sensation entered her consciousness then. The very bone-chilling, skin-crawling tremor that had haunted her thoughts for years. She raced towards the source of the terrible energy just as Tsunade leapt down from a higher floor of the tower, landing with such immense force that the ground cracked beneath her feet. Sakura joined her mentor, stowing the scroll in her weapon pouch and arming herself with 3 poison-laced kunai. Orochimaru emerged straight out of the ground. He was as terrible as she remembered him, his gaunt, snake-like eyes scanning them with lustful desire, his angular face covered by nearly translucent, powder-white skin framed by sleek, black hair. He ran his long, narrow tongue along his lips, exposing pointed teeth. Once his body was in plain view, he folded his arms and took a slow step towards them. "Tsunade," he hissed in that high, drawling voice of his mouth twisting into a sneer. "Thought I'd pay you a visit, but it seems you weren't quite ready for me yet." The Hokage growled and charged up her fists with such a powerful mass of chakra that Sakura could feel waves of heat emitting from them. "There never is a good time for you to show up, Orochimaru," she spat. "What brings you here?" The cold, throaty laugh that escaped Orochimaru's lips made the hairs on Sakura's arms rise. It was a horrible, blood-churning sound. "You'll have to ask my apprentice," he answered, and slowly turning his gaze on Sakura. "He has business here and I merely came along for the ride." Sakura was certain her heart stopped. Orochimaru's apprentice. He planned the war. Sasuke made a timely appearance. Mere seconds later did the Uchiha survivor soundlessly enter the scene, landing beside his master in a small cloud of dust and rising to a standing position in a single, fluid motion. Dread, regret, resentment, pain, all of the feelings Sakura had fought to suppress for so long came slamming back like a punch in the gut. He was so tall now he had at least a full foot on Sakura, even in her current, older body, and his aura was so sinister and overpowering that it nearly put Orochimaru's to shame. He was staring at Tsunade intently, but for a fleeting moment, he met Sakura's gaze. And it was terrifying. Not because of his physical demeanor, but because there was no familiarity, no emotion, no life in his dull, black eyes, as they passed over her. She no longer knew that boy. A boy who was once so admired, so handsome, so protective, who was now an empty void, driven into numbness by anger and hatred. "What do you want, Uchiha?" Tsunade snapped, and turning her attention to the newcomer. It was no surprise that Tsunade loathed Sasuke given how much trouble he'd caused not only her beloved student but her village. Sasuke looked at her with a disinterested facade. "Hokage," he said flatly, his voice a little deeper than Sakura was used to. "I would like a word with you." "About?" Tsunade growled and crouching into a defensive stance as Sasuke approached her. He ignored her question. "I suggest you come quietly if you don't want your villagers slaughtered to death," he continued, taking another step towards the village leader. One step too far. Before she could think twice about it, Sakura fired her 3 poisonous kunai at Sasuke's throat. There was no way in hell she would let him lay a hand on her mentor. But, as she anticipated, Sasuke's sword was up in a flash, and with the soft clangs of metal on metal, he deflected all 3 weapons. He froze for a moment but didn't spare Sakura a glance. "And anyone who gets in my way," he drawled, and lowering his sword, "is expendable." Sakura was falling. Her eyes snapped open with shock, her stomach turning from the unexpected sensation. It took a moment for her to gain her bearings and realize she was falling through a forest of trees, snapping twigs, and scraping against branches throughout the descent. Shit. The ground was too close for her to break the fall neatly, so when she did finally strike the ground, she rolled herself against the earth, crunching dried leaves beneath her, to minimize the impact of a straight-on landing. But it still hurt like a bitch. Sakura lay there, half paralyzed, and staring up at the darkening sky above her. The last traces of a sunset were slowly fading away to black. She knew what was going on now. That wasn't like the nightmare she had about the jail cell and the snakes. That wasn't a nightmare at all, that was real. Her soul was being wrenched between 2 time dimensions. And with that in mind, the only coherent thought she could muster was, "I think I'm dying." "Sakura-chan." A hazy, distant voice called from somewhere above. Her surroundings were growing sharper and clearer with each passing second, her senses more alert. But she still didn't have the strength to move. Naruto and Sasuke came into view moments later and landed beside her, both looking shocked and completely out of breath. Sasuke spoke first as he lowered to a crouch. "What is the meaning of this?" he growled as his eyes scanned her face intently. But Sakura refused to meet his gaze. The image of his future self was too freshly imprinted in her mind. "You were yelling about getting to the tower," Naruto cried. He seemed pretty jittery as he clutched Sakura's arm. And then you just fell right out of a tree. Sakura emitted a breathless laugh that could probably pass as a sob. Yeah, she said softly and looking over at Naruto. That was weird, huh? Well, let's find shelter for now, Sasuke said dismissively and reaching for Sakura's hand to pull her to her feet. But as soon as the skin of his fingertips brushed against hers, Sakura made an instinctive sound, a guttural whimper, and flinched so profoundly that Sasuke retreated his hand, nearly losing his balance with surprise. Careful, asshole! Naruto snapped. You've gotta be gentle with her. She's injured. He proceeded to scoop Sakura up and help her balance while Sasuke stared on blankly. Sakura wasn't exactly injured in the way Naruto thought she was. The fall had been pretty rough, but she probably just strained a couple of muscles at worst. There weren't any breaks or tears that could seriously handicap her. But she was feeling low on chakra. Dangerously so, her vital signs were dwindling and her head was spinning. Time travel sure did take an enormous toll on her body. Sakura knew, with complete certainty, that she would not survive a trip like that again, not in her body's current state. And now that the scroll was torn, it was probably only a matter of time before she was hurled to the future again. Naruto released her once she was steady on her feet. She still didn't dare catch Sasuke's gaze, which she felt burning on the back of her head. All right, she dismissed. Let's rest tonight. Sakura knew she couldn't make it all the way to the tower, which was still several kilometers away, in a condition like this. Orochimaru was here somewhere, and seemed to be after her, but right now, this life felt a whole lot safer than her other one did, where Orochimaru and Sasuke were immediately before her, winding up for the kill. Not to mention, she couldn't help feeling an overpowering sense of relief that this world wasn't gone forever. Her mission still stood a chance. And maybe, just maybe, somehow the time travel scroll could be repaired and this life could be salvaged. Team 7 found a secluded clearing sheltered by pine trees that they deemed worthy of camping out in. No detectable chakra signatures were in range, and the tangles of thick branches provided them with shelter and many opportunities to set up traps for any enemies who attempted to ambush them overnight. The moon and stars were visible now and extremely bright. Much to Team 7's fortune, they didn't even have to pull out their pocket flashlights while laying traps around the area. Sasuke, who had an exceptional skill with wires, and setting up traps in general, as Sakura could strongly attest to, did most of the work. Sakura had recovered a notable amount of strength during their trek to the hideout, but she was still suffering from the lingering, disorienting effects of chakra depletion. Otherwise, she was feeling alert and anxious again. She'd had a pretty horrible day, to put it lightly, and she had no idea what to do with herself. And to make matters worse, Sasuke seemed quite determined to get her attention, now that she was so obviously avoiding him. Sakura, bring me force and Bon, he instructed while securing a trap halfway up a tree, although Naruto was standing far closer to its base than Sakura was. She reluctantly brought him the supplies he needed, without a word, and scurried away as soon as her job was done. And she knew this wasn't fair, that her avoiding behavior was irrational and pointless. But who could blame her for fearing her greatest threat, her worst nightmare, regardless of which universe she was in? Once the traps were set, the moon was bright and looming high overhead. I'll take first watch, Sakura declared immediately. I won't be able to sleep anyways, so I might as well be productive. Sakura had a lot of thinking to do, and there was no way in hell she could merely sleep on everything she'd experienced that day. You sure, Sakura-chan? Naruto asked while trying, and failing, to stifle a big yawn. Sakura smirked as he went ahead and curled up in the little spot Team 7 agreed would be most appropriate for sleeping, nestled in the shelter of the largest pine tree's thick branches. Naruto had even covered the space with leaves to cushion the ground while Sasuke had been laying the traps. Sasuke was already sitting next to Naruto with his back propped up against the only low part of the tree trunk without branches protruding from it. Yes, I'm sure, she said with a soft chuckle. I'll wake one of you up when I get tired. Naruto nodded against the leafy ground. His face was pressed to and made an affirmative grunt. She turned back to face the forest, determinedly ignoring Sasuke's agonizing glare that was practically drilling holes through her skull, and scanned the parameters for a good place to keep watch from. It would probably be best if she rotated positions throughout her shift, however long that ended up being. With the way her mind was buzzing now though, she doubted she'd end up waking either of the boys at all. She noticed a small dip, hidden by leaves and pine needles, in one of the branches of the tree beside theirs. Deciding that it was her lookout spot, Sakura prepared to climb and inspect it. But she detected Sasuke behind her. She froze and peered over her shoulder and found him standing there, a few feet away, with his arms folded and a scowl plastered on his face. Sakura softly cleared her throat. "I'm taking first watch," she repeated, putting deliberate emphasis on each syllable. But, as expected, he did not retreat. Instead, he shoved his hands in his pockets and approached until he was standing directly to her left, keeping his eyes trained on her the entire time. Sakura gulped and glanced at him nervously, but he wasn't saying anything, just watching her with a frustratingly blank expression. After an excruciatingly long number of silent seconds, aside from the chirping crickets and rustling branches, Sakura couldn't stand it anymore. "What do you want?" she asked, keeping her voice as steady as she possibly could, her eyes glued to the trees ahead. But instead of answering, he positioned himself in front of her, giving Sakura nowhere else to look. She hesitantly met his stare and did everything she could not to cower beneath it. He finally spoke. "Are you injured?" he asked quietly once he had her attention. "No," she answered, and clasping her hands against her stomach out of nervousness. "Are you sick?" he asked next. Sakura's heart clenched. He knew something was wrong with her. She opened her mouth in protest but found herself closing it again. Was she sick? Was that an appropriate word for the effects of being wrenched across time? Sasuke started pacing then, circling her, and Sakura watched his every move. She didn't feel comfortable with him standing closely behind her and out of her line of sight. "You aren't holding yourself right," he said in a tone that was far too calm for her liking. "You're a mess." She tore her eyes away and pulled her arms more tightly against herself, defensively. Was he trying to accuse her of something? Was this a threat? Sakura kept her eyes on the ground, even when he was in front of her again. "You won't look at me unless I force you to," he continued, and at his comment, she glared up at him, defiantly. "Oh yeah? Who's not looking at you now?" And then, to her horror and bittersweet delight, he placed his hand on her shoulder, sending unnerving chills across her exposed skin. Her muscles tensed. "And," he said, while sliding his hand down the length of her arm, "you don't want me anywhere near you." A perceptive one, you are, she thought, although somewhere deep down, she knew he was wrong. It wasn't that she didn't like him, it was that she was acutely aware of the man he would become. A man who she was afraid of. Yet, at the same time, her heart was fluttering because of a different kind of nervousness. The tips of his fingers lingered near her elbow. "I'm not a medical ninja," he said slowly and surveying her with a penetrating gaze that she found hard to pull away from. His mouth twitched, only slightly, but enough to indicate that he was hesitating. "But I know your chakra like the back of my hand. And it's disturbed. I feel it." Sakura was at a complete loss for words. He knew, didn't he? Not necessarily about the time travel, but that her life was in danger. And something about that made her feel inexplicably relieved. That someone knew she was being torn apart, that she was suffering. Though at the same time, his perceptiveness brought feelings of unease and vulnerability. Sasuke frowned and released her arm, stepping back. He probably interpreted her silence as a confirmation. Then he peered to where Naruto was currently fast asleep at the base of the grand tree. "Do you really want to take first watch?" he asked just as one of Naruto's throaty snores sounded. Sakura made a mental note to find a way to stifle those so they didn't get detected and ambushed. "I won't be able to sleep either." "Why not?" she blurted out before she could think better of it. Idiot. She knew about his sleeping difficulties, the pills hidden in his forbidden drawer. But Sasuke didn't seem offended. He sighed. Because, he said and glancing up, apparently searching for the right words. You're frustrating. I'm frustrating? She shot back, her voice raising slightly. He nodded. And annoying, he added, as if that would clarify things. Are you serious? There was something about that damn word that made her blood boil. And Sakura knew that it was trivial, but the words started pouring out before she could stop herself. You drive me insane. She snarled and jabbing an accusatory finger at his chest. You snapped at me in your kitchen the other night and wouldn't talk to me for days. You're forcing me to sleep on your couch and I honestly don't even know why anymore. And I've been making you meals that just keep disappearing but you haven't said anything about. He cut her off then. Not with his words but with his arm, which he slipped around her shoulders and used to pull her right against him. Of all the situations Sakura had dreamed Sasuke would hug her in either of her lives, this was certainly not one of them. But it worked. It shut her up. She let herself slump against his body in defeat as he pressed the side of his face to her forehead. They didn't say anything at all for a long moment, but they didn't really have to. Sakura felt his answer through his gentle touch, through his heartbeat, which was much faster than she thought it would be, and through how he was using his arm to hoist her up to alleviate some of the burden on her tiring body. And this answer was a little breathtaking. He didn't loosen his grip at all when he spoke next. I can't sleep because I don't know how to help you, Sakura, he said, his breath warm against the side of her head. It's frustrating. It took every fiber of her being to keep the tears from spilling then. Her well-being worried him, kept him from sleeping. And that was so thrilling but it also stung. Because in another world, a world that was looming much closer than she previously thought, their connection was severed. And if, or when, she went back there again, she knew she would have to use all her strength to inflict pain on him, to kill him, and protect the village. Sasuke's grip on her was so tight like she was about to slip away. And that was just how tightly she needed him to hold her. Because for all she knew, she would. Chapter 24 Time and Again. It was common practice for ninjas to lay low while out on lengthy missions after dark. After all, aside from the few ninjas with special ocular abilities, darkness was innately disadvantageous in combat. So instead, most ninjas used this time to catch up on sleep and replenish their chakra. But other ninjas saw it as the perfect opportunity to strike. If you really wanted to, locating resting teams wasn't a particular challenge, even in the dark. Any cave or thick cluster of trees was a prime spot for taking shelter. So with practice, a ninja could familiarize himself with cues for tracking vulnerable targets. Yes, there. Locating the target was the hard part. The remaining steps were rather simple: take out their night watch quickly and silently. Then the rest of the sleeping team was at your mercy. I found her, Orochimaru-sama. It was a real pity Sasuke and Naruto forgot to grab those 3 dead rabbits before leaving their last campsite and chasing after Sakura. Only 30 minutes into her watch duty, Sakura's stomach tinged with hunger. Although she had soldier pills and was certain Naruto smuggled a couple of rice patties into the arena, she wanted to save those for an emergency situation. Sure, she was being wrenched across time dimensions, which was probably slowly killing her, and was being pursued by one of the most powerful villains in the ninja world. But thanks to a combination of stubbornness and anxiety, Sakura knew that no matter how bad things seemed, they could always get worse. This was not an emergency situation. The rice patties could wait. Sakura was perched on a branch halfway up a pine tree near where the boys were sleeping. The surrounding branches and pine needles obscured her from view and blocked the breeze, but the chilly night air still raised goosebumps across her exposed skin. She rubbed her arms and huddled closer to the trunk while peering through the tangle of branches at her teammates. Naruto was spread-eagled at the base of the tree. Thankfully his snoring had tapered off. The poor guy was exhausted after an outrageously fast-paced first day in the Forest of Death. He had worked his ass off in their match against the Rain Ninjas and their clones, and mere minutes after had been wounded by a barrage of Senbon before tending to an unconscious Sakura for several hours, then half carrying her to their new hideout. What a trooper, Sakura thought with a fond smile. Her eyes followed the length of his leg, which was currently stretched on top of her other teammate's stomach. Her gaze lingered there and the smile slowly faltered. She never properly healed Sasuke's puncture wounds and his chakra levels were dwindling. After that hug a few hours earlier, he had asked once again if she was certain she wanted to take first watch. "What, you don't think I can handle it?" She had shot back with a sneer. "Whatever," was the last thing she heard him mumble before he joined Naruto at the base of the tree. Despite his apparent concerns, he must have trusted that she wasn't about to drop dead because he fell asleep almost instantly. "He really does care about me, huh?" Sakura pursed her lips, her gaze lingering on her sleeping training partner. There was no way Sasuke saw her as just an annoyance, a burden, or even as just a teammate. He never did, and Sakura knew it. Even in her past life, Sasuke had always cared deeply for Team 7, which really had become something of a messed up little family. As a person who eventually threw everyone's feelings away for a deluded quest for power, it was remarkable how many times Sasuke had put his life directly on the line to protect his teammates. As selfish as he had become, there had always been something real there, something that words couldn't quite describe, that kept them together. And perhaps now, in this new life, there was something even more powerful connecting the two of them. A special kind of respect and mutual understanding. It sucked. Because Sakura's conflicting feelings of fear and love were starting to blur together, especially after the sharp reminder of what Sasuke's future self had become. There, he was a ruthless killer waging war on Konoha. And here, a genuinely good guy who wanted nothing more than her safety. Nothing makes sense. This is torture. Before she drove herself mad, Sakura averted her gaze and cast all thoughts of her teammate aside. She was on watch duty and needed to be alert and focused. She scanned the parameters carefully, but it was quite dark now, aside from the soft glow of the moon and stars, rendering her visual scanning nearly pointless. She would have to rely on her ability to detect chakra signatures if she was going to protect her team from prowling enemies. Although she was feeling considerably better than when she fell out of the tree, Sakura got the sense that her trip to the future had taken a serious and possibly permanent toll on her body. A dull ache was coursing through each of her limbs and her vital organs were at half capacity, at best. And, as Sasuke had pointed out, there was something wrong with her chakra circulation. Even now it was fluctuating in ways that she couldn't get a handle on. Sakura knew there was no amount of medical ninjutsu that could restore it. Unless she unlocked her seal. She was certain of it now. Her charging power was on the verge of being unleashed. The strength of 100 seal leached a bit of Sakura's power every time she used it. But then, like an investment, it grew that leached chakra to exponential levels. It was an intoxicating yet frustrating sensation. Sakura knew there was unfathomable strength somewhere within her, but she couldn't touch it, yet. But perhaps Sasuke was right about her former violent urges towards an undeserving enemy. Maybe it was her seal's cue that it only needed a little bit more chakra to unlock. If she wasn't having issues with her chakra to begin with, and if she wasn't in the middle of trying to keep a low profile, Sakura would have given it a go right then and there. Unfortunately, given her predicament, she was better off biding her time, abstaining from her temptation to. Her head snapped up. She detected a presence. And not just any presence. It was the one she'd encountered in the alley in Konoha. And in the Land of Waves. And now here, somewhere in the forest. Somewhere close by. Sakura's skin crawled at the dreadfully familiar energy as she reached into her weapon holster for a kunai. Sakura could feel it drawing nearer but couldn't determine from which direction. Something firmly struck a pressure point at the base of her neck and she collapsed. Sakura knew from the beginning of her time travel mission that she would have to sacrifice her old world for her new one. And, earlier that day, when the powers of the scroll unraveled and sent her reeling to the future, Sakura got the sense that her new world wasn't as safe as she had once believed. Not only was the village at risk, but also her life. And maybe Sakura was bound for the same fate as countless ninjas before her who were killed in the line of duty for the greater good. But if she was going to be killed in action, Sakura sure didn't want it to be here tied to a tree in the middle of the forest of death in the dead of night. When Sakura roused, two thoughts occurred to her: that she was being taken hostage and that she probably should have grabbed that rice paddy after all. And next she tried to gain her bearings. It appeared she was somewhere in the heart of the forest, tied to an enormous oak tree on the outskirts of a clearing about 50 meters wide. The moon was right overhead, which provided a relatively clear view of her surroundings, including her three captors who were huddled a short distance away, all wearing black cloaks and matching black masks. The presence she detected earlier was nowhere in the vicinity. This is so inconvenient. Sakura had no idea how far she was from her teammates. Although her mysterious captors weren't making any move to hurt her, for now, nor did they feel particularly powerful, the ropes binding her arms and legs were too damn tight for her to free herself. She also didn't want to spike her chakra and give the impression she wanted a fight. Regardless of who these ninjas were, she was outnumbered 3-1. While keeping her breathing and heart rate steady, she watched them intently to gauge their strengths and weaknesses in case a battle did ensue. But all she could really gather was their hunched, unthreatening positions and that their chakra levels were either being masked or incredibly low. Then, out of the blue, one of the cloaked figures dropped to the ground. Sakura barely managed to stifle her gasp. The energy emitting from the fallen figure fizzled out instantly, and even without medical expertise, Sakura would have known he was dead. And then the others, one by one with their cloaks billowing behind them, fell to the ground and died. In the middle of the clearing, under the moonlight, right before Sakura's eyes. She stared in total bewilderment at the lifeless heap of bodies, concealed by layers of black fabric. Using every skill at her trained eye's disposal, Sakura scanned them carefully, attempting to discern the cause of her captor's deaths through the darkness. Was there a silent killer nearby? Was she next? A beam of moonlight peeked out through the hazy clouds above, shining down into the clearing and illuminating the bodies. There was no blood, no weapons. So they didn't appear to have suffered an ambush. But she caught sight of something far more terrible in the light of the moonbeam. One of the captor's arms was protruding from beneath the tangles of dark fabric. And along it ran a pattern of familiar black markings. Her breath caught in her throat. It was the disease. Overwhelmed by sheer panic, Sakura pressed her head back against the tree as droplets of perspiration lined her brow. It was Orochimaru. Sending more diseased ninjas after her. And not to kill her, but for some other unknown purpose. She needed to get away. Now that her captors were dead, she foresaw no consequence to spiking her chakra. So without further ado, she pumped chakra down her arms, turning them into razor-sharp scalpels to split the ropes. Leaving so soon? She halted in her tracks. Someone was directly to her right. Sakura slowly shifted her gaze in the direction of the voice until her eyes locked on the imposter. Her body seized. A woman was standing there in the shadows, leaning against a nearby tree, and staring directly at her with a beady, bloodthirsty stare. The woman was wearing a grass village head protector and a beige tunic. Her hair was long and sleek, her face angular, her lips curled into a wicked smile. And Sakura knew exactly who this woman was. Or who this woman now was. All thoughts of escape faded away. You like what I brewed up? The woman asked slowly while unfolding her arms and approaching her prey. Sakura's body was frozen, her mouth far too dry to choke out an answer. This can't be happening. In response to her silence, the woman chuckled darkly and slunk into the clearing, placing a finger over her mouth pensively. They didn't last long, she observed while gazing at the fallen cloaked ninjas. Pity. I hoped you would become acquainted. She turned back to Sakura, her deranged eyes gleaming. This is for you, you know. This illness. Sakura finally found her voice. Why? She breathed. The woman sneered and drew closer, the moonlight casting shadows along her pale, sunken face. I want to find out who exactly you are. This pink medic I've heard so many things about, she drawled. It's over. This is where it ends, Sakura thought as her body went completely numb. This was how she died. By the hand of her greatest fear, her worst enemy, totally helpless and alone in the middle of the forest of death. This was where the mission ended. And somehow, in that moment, Sakura felt a manic surge of defiance. If we're really going to introduce ourselves like this, why don't you cut the disguise and show your real face? She growled. The woman paused, a flicker of surprise crossing her features. I know who you are, Sakura continued bravely and clenching her fists. Orochimaru. The woman acknowledged Sakura's remark by raising her bony, powder-white hand to her own face. What happened next didn't come as a surprise to Sakura, but that didn't make it any less disturbing and gruesome. The woman clawed at her forehead with long fingernails, peeling away the skin. Orochimaru disposed of his disguise like a shedding snake and the jutsu broke, his body resuming its original form and his blood-churning chakra whirling to life. Sakura trembled. His energy was so sinister and so great that she knew this was an enemy she could never defeat. Not ever in this world, or even in the other. He was now in plain sight, under the light of the moon on the edge of the clearing. The face of the woman was splayed on the ground in shreds and his snake-like yellow eyes bore into Sakura's. He wasn't smiling. Who are you? He hissed in that terrible icy tone of his. But Sakura didn't answer. She was panic-stricken and afraid to say anything that would hasten her impending death. He drew nearer still, until he was towering right over her, his body mere inches away. My subordinate has been tailing you for some time now. Coupled with my own research, we have a theory of what you are and where you've come from. But I am implored to pry a little myself. He stroked her face with one of his cold, skeletal fingers, and Sakura shuddered while pulling her eyes away from him. The gods only knew what would happen now if he caught her in a genjutsu. Don't look into his eyes, don't look into his eyes. I also can't help but notice that you reek of someone I know quite well. And that intrigues me. And then, to her horror, she felt a cold, wet pressure glide across her chin and along her jawline. His tongue. It was far smoother and longer than that of a human tongue and the sensation was haunting. And it clicked then maybe he wanted her. Wanted her for a host. The very thought chilled Sakura to the marrow of her bones. It seemed he detected that she was close to unlocking Tsunade's seal. And maybe that was enough for him to change his mind about targeting the Uchiha heir. Maybe she should have been looking out for herself rather than spending her time worrying over Sasuke. Because if he cursed her, it was game over. Sakura knew that, once sealed, succumbing to the allure of Orochimaru's curse mark was a matter of willpower in the end. But that wasn't the problem. She only had a 10% chance of surviving the bite upon its infliction, and in her body's current state, she knew she wouldn't. In the rare chance she did survive, however, it would seriously complicate things. If she lived through the pain of it all, she would have to seal it herself. She had a sealing scroll tucked away in her medical pouch somewhere. Although sealing wasn't her area of expertise, she had a general background in suppressing disease like curses similar to Orochimaru's. Assuming they ever found her, she would have to teach Sasuke or Naruto to form a makeshift seal and eventually, she'd have Kakashi seal it properly whenever he returned from that goddamn untimely mission of his. And, of course, these thoughts were premised on the wishful notion that Orochimaru didn't just kill her on the spot. Orochimaru retreated his tongue, all while Sakura's heart hammered in her chest. What was his next move? Her urge to strike him was overwhelming, but her efforts would be futile. Sakura felt the ropes move against her arms and legs. When she looked down, she realized with a rush of dread that they were no longer ropes. They were snakes. Orochimaru smiled at her wasted effort to free herself and bent his face closer, much too close, until she could feel his musty breath on her skin and see every contour of his bony face. She felt all color drain from her own as he gripped a strand of her hair and ran his thumb and forefinger along it. Her body tensed in anticipation for him to sink his sharp teeth into the exposed flesh near her neck. I know how to break you, he said softly as his smile broadened. Sakura's blood ran cold, but her boundless hatred outweighed her fear. I wouldn't doubt it, she spat without meeting his gaze, a spark of resistance rising in her voice. What do you want from me? And yes, both figuratively and literally, she knew Orochimaru could break her, could destroy her. Her body was in its weakest state and she had a hunch that he saw right through her. Aside from that, she was totally vulnerable to a genjutsu right now, or worse, his curse. She was rendered helpless. But that didn't mean she would go down without a fight. If she was going to die here anyways, she might as well go down with some dignity. Orochimaru laughed, and it was a cold, humorless sound. I'm glad we're on the same page. He droned. And then the ground rumbled beneath their feet. Sakura was certain her heart stopped when she detected a new, gigantic presence looming just ahead, obscured by the darkness of the trees. The head of a mammoth snake slithered into the clearing, crushing the small trees in its wake, its large yellow eyes gleaming in the moonlight, its jowls stretching open to reveal meter-long fangs. Now let's sit back and enjoy the show, shall we? Orochimaru hissed before stepping away and licking his lips. Show? She choked back. What was he playing at? Was he going to have her fight the snake while he sat back and watched? Was he planning to have her body torn limb from limb by this monster? I need my seal. Oh God, I need my seal. They're here, Orochimaru said, smirking. Let's begin. They? She repeated, perplexed, but the word barely escaped her when she realized just what the wicked snake meant by breaking her. He wasn't going to inflict physical pain. He wasn't even going to drive her mad with illusions. No, what he had in mind was far worse. Sakura-chan. She watched in horror as Naruto and Sasuke sprang down from the tree branches and into the clearing. Sakura heard a rush of air and the sickening sound of severing flesh as Sasuke's shuriken found their targets in the rope snakes' bodies. Their long forms split into pieces, spraying Sakura with their blood, but freeing her from their holds as their broken bodies dropped at her feet. Meanwhile, Naruto took a swing at the giant snake, which dodged at the last second. Orochimaru vanished. You alright? Sasuke asked with his back to her, and a kunai pointed towards the giant opponent before them as she untangled herself from the remains of the dead snakes. But she promptly ignored him and gripped at the fabric of his sleeve. He turned back to her with alarm, his crimson eyes widening. We need to run, she pleaded. Please. We'll die here. Naruto landed on her other side. I think it's too late for that, he snarled and squaring up the giant serpent, which was coiling up to strike the three of them. Naruto's right, Sasuke said and pulling his arm out of Sakura's grip. We take out the snake first. And then he started making the seal for a fire release attack. Sakura gritted her teeth and whirled around to locate Orochimaru, but he was nowhere in sight and his chakra was undetectable. But she didn't doubt he was nearby, watching silently from the shadows. He clearly wanted them to fight the snake. Even though she hated playing into his schemes, at this rate, they didn't have much choice. It was beyond doubt that this snake could kill them if they didn't defend themselves. Fine. They would fight. At the very least, Sakura would do everything she possibly could to unlock her seal in the process. Team 7, let's go. Naruto cried and conjuring 3 shadow clones. And then the snake propelled forward, forcing the 3 of them to scatter, and slammed its face into the ground where they'd just been standing with a riveting force. Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura all seemed to be of the same mind attack in the brief moment it was down. Sasuke twisted around in midair, aiming a series of fireballs along its spine, while Naruto's clones fired knives at its neck from different angles. Sakura loaded her fists with chakra and prepared to drive them into the base of its skull with all the force she could amass. But something took hold of her ankle and pulled backwards, causing her to lose her footing and drag along the ground. She clawed into the dirt and pumped chakra down her calf in attempt to break free, but the bind was withering and coiling up the length of her leg. Sakura grimaced and reached into her weapon holster. It was a damn snake again. After a brief struggle on the ground, she lodged a senbon through its head. With a shrill scream, the snake released her and collapsed to the ground. She scrambled to her feet and turned back to where her teammates were battling the monster snake. They appeared to have noticed that Sakura had been held back. Sasuke and Naruto landed on the ground and started running in her direction, but the tail of the mighty beast smashed into the ground in front of them, blocking their path. He doesn't want me fighting with them, Sakura thought, realization crossing her features as she felt more tiny snakes swarm up her legs. She turned to her left, and there was Orochimaru, leaning against a tree with his arms folded, an amused smile dancing on his lips. He knows about my seal. And he doesn't want me unlocking it. She cursed and wrestled with the snakes, but new ones continued materializing out of the ground to replace the ones she defeated. She stamped her feet and sent small shockwaves of chakra out of her arms to blast them away. But there was no end to them, and Sakura eventually yielded to their holds for a brief moment to look out at the battle ahead. Many of the surrounding trees were on fire, and flares of blue indicated that Naruto's clones were hurling towards the monster with chakra-enhanced fists. The boys seemed to have an upper hand because the snake was whipping around and snapping at the air disorientedly, uprooting trees and creating a series of craters throughout the clearing. Now! She heard Naruto yell from somewhere among the rubble. And then about 30 Naruto clones sprang up into the air, all gripping onto wires. The wires were gleaming in the moonlight, and Sakura could tell that they were part of an interconnected system attached to nearby trees. The clones yanked the wires up, which sent the snake slamming down into the ground, completely restrained. And then a distinct chirping of electricity met Sakura's ears, and she barely caught a glimpse of Sasuke thrusting his Chidori-riddled hand between the snake's eyes, since it was all over so fast. The snake emitted a screeching howl before it ceased all movement. Sakura felt a brief surge of pride at how brilliantly executed her teammates' plan was, but then she was, rather violently, pulled back to her own struggle when one of the small snakes wrapped itself around her neck. She cried out with shock and channeled chakra to her hands while gripping onto the snake's body, blasting it to bits with spurts of blood, which regrettably got all over her face and hair. Naruto was at her side in a flash, using a kunai to slash at the snakes confining her, sending more snake blood gushing all over the place. By the time Sasuke joined them, his Sharingan glowing through the darkness and covered in quite a lot of blood himself, Sakura was free. Thanks. She gasped and wiping her gloved hands across her chin and down her arms. You guys were great. But we've got to. How did you get yourself into this mess? Sasuke interrupted through heavy breaths. It appeared using the Chidori had paid a price, especially since he had so recently learned the technique. Seriously? Naruto chimed in, nodding at his side. What's with all of these snakes? How did they abduct you like that? It's not the snakes. She started, but she stopped dead and she felt the boys seize up as well. Orochimaru's bone-chilling energy was suddenly everywhere, bombarding them from all directions. Instinctively, the three of them turned so that their backs faced each other. What is that? Naruto whispered and stepping so far backwards that Sakura felt the sleeve of his jacket against her arm. And then, in a swirl of leaves, he reappeared, in all of his terrible glory, at the base of his fallen snake. They all craned their necks in his direction. And Sakura's heart was a frantic drum. What was going to happen now? Was he going to kill them all? Curse her? Catch them in a genjutsu and torture their minds? Don't look directly in his eyes. She cried while averting her own gaze to the snake corpse. Who are you? Sasuke commanded and moving closer to his teammates protectively, a fistful of shuriken in hand. But Orochimaru only laughed and shook his head. Why don't you ask your teammate, Uchiha? He hissed. She seems to know quite a lot about me. Sasuke fell silent and Sakura felt her teammates' gazes on her. But she refused to respond. Did Orochimaru actually know how she knew him? That she'd already spent a lifetime despising him? We've got to go. Now, she breathed and inching even closer to the boys. She was getting a horrible feeling about this. You are an impressive trio, Orochimaru continued calmly, neglecting to acknowledge her pleas. This certainly won't be our last encounter. He disappeared. Sakura's breath caught in her throat. She, Sasuke, and Naruto had moved back so far that their spines were pressed together. Was Orochimaru gone? His chakra was still in range, so probably not. Then what was his next move? But before Sakura could think up how he might re-enter the scene, Sasuke gasped. Shocked, Sakura and Naruto whipped around as Sasuke's body clenched and gave way against theirs. And Sakura realized what was happening before her eyes confirmed it. No. Something long, scaly, and white was protruding from the ground at Sasuke's feet, coiling around his body, clinging tightly to his torso and neck in what appeared to be a choke hold. What Sakura wanted to believe was that this was just another snake. But upon closer inspection and with a stab of dismay, she spotted Orochimaru's demonic face, his eyes rolled back in his skull, hovering near Sasuke's shoulder. This isn't real. Sasuke! Naruto screamed and taking a vengeful swipe at Orochimaru's inhumanly elongated body, though not at full force as not to come in contact with his teammate, who was now withering in pain. Naruto's clawed hands left scratch marks along the pale, ghostly skin. As quickly as he emerged, Orochimaru released his grasp on Sasuke and shot back into the ground before Naruto could land another strike. As soon as his body was freed, Sasuke crippled to his knees, clutching his neck and shaking violently. Sakura extended a trembling hand to touch his shoulder just as he emitted his first cry. And the unbearable sound, the guttural moan that erupted from somewhere deep in his throat, ripped Sakura's heart apart. She faltered and stared at him in sheer terror. She was too late. There were several occasions in Sakura's life when she had convinced herself that she wanted Sasuke Uchiha dead. And not only dead, but dead by her hand. A lifetime ago. The tip of her own knife had hovered just above the Uchiha crest on Sasuke's back. Right between his shoulder blades, she had nearly run him through. And put them both out of their miseries. But if, in this unjust world, Sakura ever did get her way, Sasuke would never hurt. Deep down, it was the very last thing she wanted. Because his pain was hers. Sakura-chan, what's happening? Naruto cried and fighting back tears while he gripped onto Sasuke's shoulders, attempting to steady him. Past her teammate's hands and the edge of Sasuke's collar, she glimpsed the black mark materializing. It was an out-of-body experience when she answered, because she hadn't yet processed it. He's cursed. Naruto's eyes locked on Sasuke's neck in horror as he caught sight of the 3-ink black tomo beside the puncture wound. He might not have known what this curse signified, but it was no question that Sasuke's life force was draining. He was convulsing and losing consciousness. Not again. Sakura could not let this play out like last time. Suddenly, her terror morphed into a burning rage. Aggression and anger surfaced like she'd never experienced before. She would not let this happen again. Suddenly the only thing she was aware of was that he was escaping. Sakura leaped away from Sasuke with a newfound fire and need. Next, she was slamming her fists into the ground and blowing up the clearing to pieces, forcing Naruto to hoist Sasuke up and spring backwards. It worked too. It forced Orochimaru to the surface before he made it to the outskirts and into the mass of trees surrounding them. And it unlocked her seal. As soon as her fists met the ground, a strange sensation reverberated through every fiber in her body, followed by a dull stinging in the center of her forehead. The sensation transformed into a rush that began in her core and ebbed down to her fingertips and toes. The feeling was pure ecstasy. Sakura released a low sigh and rolled her head back, her lips curling into a smile as her entire being was consumed by a stunning new power. Not only was she feeling renewed and revitalized, but her muscles felt coarser, her skin firmer, her heart stronger. Her body was armor. And she was a loose cannon. She locked eyes on her target and in that moment, nothing else existed. Orochimaru seemed to read her intentions and detect her bloodthirst, because in a flash of white, he was on her, his long, skeletal hands wrapping tightly around her throat. Sakura's own hands were loaded with chakra at a greater speed and quantity than she'd ever been capable of before, and she placed them on his arms. Upon the slight contact, with a soft hiss, his arms began to disintegrate from the sheer strength of her chakra. Orochimaru emitted a growl and lunged his face towards Sakura, his teeth bared. But he failed to meet his target because Naruto intercepted, cloaked in bubbling red chakra, by tearing the man away from Sakura and slamming him straight into the solid earth with a mighty roar. Naruto sprang back to Sakura's side and exchanged a look with her, his pupils slits, his small, sharp fangs protruding past his lips, and his fingers bearing thick talons. His energy was a whirlwind of blinding force, far greater than her own, but Sakura held his gaze without fear. They exchanged a nod. And then Sakura and her seal and Naruto and the fox attacked together. From all fours, Naruto propelled himself forward, driving his clawed hand directly through Orochimaru's abdomen, impaling him. But the body started melting on impact, oozing towards the ground in a puddle of mud. A mud clone. Then a white arm shot out from behind a nearby bush and grabbed Naruto by the collar, pulling him against a tree. In a flash, Orochimaru was directly before him, raising an open hand and loading chakra to each individual fingertip. Sakura instantly recognized Orochimaru's intentions with Naruto. He was going to seal away the fox like he did last time. Not on my watch. Orochimaru was too slow to react when Sakura leaped through the air, her heeled boots, blazing with chakra, colliding with his head with a loud crack. The impact drove Orochimaru back and away from Naruto, clutching his head. Sakura emitted a snarl, pulling out a fistful of Senbon and spreading her arms protectively. She was certain the Orochimaru she'd just struck was the real body when she felt a slight flicker in his huge reserve of chakra, one that indicated he was experiencing pain. He hissed and produced a series of clones. And when the small army of Orochimarus raced towards the pair of them, Sakura remained fearless and determined. The fight that ensued was bloody, muddy, and ruthless. Together, Naruto and Sakura managed to slice limbs from, impale, and decapitate all of the mud clones. But no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't reach Orochimaru's real body again. By the time the clones were gone, a significant amount of their chakra was also depleted. As a result, Naruto started losing control to the fox. Right as Sakura snapped the neck of the last clone, Naruto, who no longer had any enemies within reach, took a violent swing at her. She managed to dodge him at the last second, but the action sobered her from the high of unlocking her seal. Naruto was dangerously low on his own supply of chakra and was relying on the fox's power in exchange for control over his body. Naruto! She cried and roughly taking hold of his shoulder. Snap out of it! But he swiped at her again, forcing her to grab his wrists with all the strength she could. Focus, Naruto! Sasuke's dying and we need to focus. Her eyes darted across the clearing to where Sasuke was laying and her heart lurched. Her healer instincts activated. What am I doing? Then her eyes shifted to where Orochimaru was perched, atop the corpse of his giant snake, arms folded and smirking amusedly. What are we doing? She gritted her teeth. Was this part of his plan? To drive her and Naruto to the edge? To leave Sasuke to die? Was this what he meant by show? Her stomach turned. I think my work here is finished, Orochimaru drawled, as if reading her mind, and forming a hand seal. Until next time. And then he vanished, for good, Sakura detected, because all of his chakra and terrible energy disappeared along with him. She cast a nervous glance towards Naruto, whose arms were still in her grasp. His fox-like features had slipped away, his eyes wide and brimming with tears. He seemed to understand that they'd been manipulated somehow. They raced to their friend as fast as their exhausted bodies would allow. Sakura pulled off her blood and mud-soaked gloves and lowered herself over Sasuke, turning him so that he was flat on his back. He was barely conscious. Naruto crawled over to join them and placed a hand on Sasuke's arm. What just happened to us? He choked and gazing up at Sakura through bleary eyes, which lingered on her forehead where her diamond seal was now in plain sight. Sakura pursed her lips while pulling off Sasuke's head protector and placing her hands on either side of his head, sending a pulse of medical chakra directly to his brain in attempt to rouse him. Sasuke simply couldn't lose consciousness again. Because in her old life, when he woke after being inflicted, the curse had taken over him. Perhaps he wouldn't lose himself this time if he stayed awake. We lost control of ourselves, I guess, Sakura said quietly, her voice raspy with exhaustion. Although she and Naruto had both lost control in very different ways, their trigger was the same. Sakura felt her new power stirring within her. But it was drained after the battle. The rush was over. This strength was something she'd learned to cultivate and control with time. But in that moment of emotionally charged madness, her anger for Orochimaru had been so all-consuming that she'd forgotten a part of herself, the part that drove her to heal. She gazed down at Sasuke's lifeless face and felt an unbearable wave of remorse. He was cursed again. She had failed to protect him. The skin near the black mark at the base of his neck was red and irritated. His body was fighting it, fighting the odds, the 90% chance of immediate death upon the curse's infliction. Is he going to die? Naruto asked, his voice as devoid of strength as she felt. No, she responded immediately, trying to reassure her friend, while a sob welled up in her throat and a hot tear trickled down her dirt-covered face. Naruto seemed to detect that her words and feelings betrayed each other. He placed a hand on her trembling shoulder. He did it once. He has to do it again. Stay with me, Sakura pleaded, and sliding her hands down, sending another pulse through Sasuke's temples, pushing him closer to consciousness. His handsome face was so pale, lifeless, and cold in her hands. She could not live this life a second time, a life spent watching this boy lose himself and slip away through her fingertips. She could not handle losing him twice. Stay with me, she repeated over and over, even long after Sasuke's eyes fluttered open.